This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you. All right. So I'll turn it over to Brenda.
Sorry to have my back to you. All right, well, first I thought it would be, well, thank you all for agreeing to participate in this. I thought it would be good to start off with introductions so we all know who everybody is. So to do that first, I'm Brenda Denny, and I'm a Special Projects Coordinator for Land and Resource Development and sort of facilitating this process.
I'm Ralph Robertson. I'm a farmer. I live between New Windsor and Westminster. Our family's been on the farm 100 years. We're not proud of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm Cheryl Dossie. I'm an adjoining property owner to the proposed Nora Valley Community Solar Project.
Okay.
I'm Annette Fleischel, and my husband and I own a 50-acre farm, and it's farmed by Don Marin. You guys know Don from the Farm Bureau. He's a steward of the land, as are we. We happen to be across the street from the Spring Valley Solar Project, which is how I got involved in community solar. We love our land. I need to tell you that I'm not just talking for myself. I'm representing the people that I've spoken to in the community, all the people that I've met, and my remarks are gonna hopefully mimic something that they feel too.
Good.
I'm glad you brought that up because I'm representing Farm Bureau.
Mhm.
That's
Not myself, Farm
Yeah.
Bureau.
It's a great organization.
Representing the community that surrounds me as well as the
Yes.
center.
Great. Well, thank you.
I'm Mary Lane, Department of Planning.
I'm Hannah with Department of Planning as well.
I'm Anastasia, I'm with zoning.
My name's Chief Voigt, I'm the zoning administrator for the county.
I'm Kirsten Agrel from Development Review, and I know a few of you already from some of the projects we're managing, or coordinating rather.
I'm Don Herring. I'm also here representing Farm Bureau. Grew up in Carroll County. We have about 800-acre farm, and I've been in the farm credit system for 35 years. Retired now, trying to repay some of my debt back to the county, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm Laura Matthias. I am the Bureau Chief of Development Review.
And Chris Hine, I'm the Director of Land and Resource Management. And I believe we just had, well, Pat, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. First of all, thank you for letting me do this remotely. My husband and I are near Fort Benning, Georgia. We're down here to see our son graduate from infantry officer training. So thanks for arranging this. My name is Pat Toth. My husband Lou and I own the 125-acre portion along Fanny Dorsey Road in Sykesville, where the Project Sunshine project is proposed.
Very good. Thank you. And I see we've got two more folks joined in. Caller 1, can you identify yourself?
That might be me. I'm not sure. There are two of us, I think, from CCSA. My name is Laurel Passera. I'm the Senior Policy Director for the Coalition for Community Solar Access, and we represent a little over 100 member companies around the country that engage in community solar and community solar services.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then there's someone else who's on the phone.
Should also be with CCSA.
Maybe they're just listening in.
Okay.
If I had to guess, it's probably my colleague Tyler Orcutt. She's listening in. We're both kind of filling in for Charlie Coggeshall, who would normally be here, and he probably will be in a little bit. So we're just kind of listening and happy to jump in and answer questions if needed.
Oh, there's Tyler, just jumped on. Yes, Tyler, can you hear us?
Yeah, hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Excellent. And then it looks like there's someone else who we're waiting on. Oh, all right. Oh, go ahead.
So welcome, everybody. I want us to start off, just do typical meeting stuff. I know everybody here is going to be great to work with, but I know we all have differing views, but we're going to agree to disagree. And, you know, try to have a good discussion that's productive. And, you know, we all have the same goal really, is to come out of this with feedback that we can provide to the commissioners that will provide us something that we can move forward with, that either people can live with or that the commissioners, you know, are comfortable with or whatever, but that's our common goal. So we'll keep that in mind as we're having our discussions. And as you know, the commissioners are the ones who directed, you know, the composition of the work group. So you all, I'm sure most of you know that at least, because I know you guys have seen the meetings. So that's how we got to where we are. But of course, we chose you based on, like I know Annette's been at several of the meetings, and Patty as well. So it was easy to kind of pick some people we knew were available and also had fit the description of what we were looking for that representation. So, and as you also know, of course, Chris already mentioned that we don't have the meeting open to the public, but it's being recorded. So if anybody wants to watch it and you know anybody who's interested, the link will be kind of sent to us from GoToMeeting, like within a certain time frame after the meeting. So we'll post it tomorrow. So the other thing is, now you know we have, and I've mentioned this in our emails back and forth, and our emails will, our communication will primarily be by email, because with this many people, that's the easiest way to get information out quickly and thoroughly. But as you know, we've got 3 meetings scheduled, and they're all long, but and I know that 6 months sounds like a long time, but it's really not. When you start working your way back from the end of the moratorium and work in like legal processes and timeframes that have to occur, it kind of really gets us down to a very small timeframe to actually get these meetings in. So we have these 3 meetings scheduled. It's possible that we might have to schedule a 4th one, which would likely be the first week of May, in order to keep everything going. And I'll go over the timeline with you a little bit in a few minutes, but if that is said, if you have questions about anything as we're going through, or is anything you don't understand, please do ask, because we don't want you to not understand something that we're talking about. And, we want everybody to feel comfortable that you understand what's being discussed. So at this meeting, you've got the agenda. Today, we're just going to give you a little bit of background and an overview, like over what's in your packet here for this meeting. Today, the idea is we have 2 different kind of focuses for our discussion. One will be applicability, and that's kind of where all of this is going to apply. And then specific criteria, which is like those individual requirements that will be placed on a facility. So today we'll be talking about the applicability, and that'll be in your packet, further in your packet. The second meeting, we'll talk about specific criteria. And then the third meeting, we'll wrap up anything that we haven't already talked about. There might be some things we needed to circle back to. And at some point, we'll brief the commissioners on the discussions. And if that happens before that time, there may be feedback from them that we also need to discuss. So that's the 3 meetings so far. And like I said, possibly another one in first week of May if we can't get through everything. But we're aiming for 3. We'll see how it goes. Now, the other thing that kind of help with productivity of these meetings is we aren't looking for consensus on every issue. That would probably take a really long time. So what we're really looking for from you in these meetings, as we discuss we have each of the issues kind of outlined in these materials. As we discuss each issue, we're going to look for your feedback, what some ideas are. And when we go back to the board with it, we're going to say, well, here's like kind of a range of options that was discussed, rather than, well, we have to come to consensus on this, and this is what it's going to be. So, and then they can decide, what they want to do with it. So, so our task here is for the work group is, as you may know from following along with the commissioners' meetings, we're only talking about community solar. So there are other types of solar, either commercial or accessory, and community solar is a subset of commercial solar. And we're only talking about community solar, and we're only talking about community solar in the agricultural zone, because it is allowed in commercial and industrial zones, but we're only talking about community solar and ag. So that should help, focus this as well. So if you want to go to this flow chart that you have in your packet, I'll just give you a quick overview of the process and timeline here. So we have 6 months of the moratorium. And as you know, they adopted the board adopted the moratorium on May 9th. So that puts us through early September. What did I say? Oh, March 9th, sorry.
I'm traveling.
So we only have through early September to actually get everything done in 6 months. So, and within that time, we have the 2 blue boxes. First we had the direction. It was 2 weeks before we got direction from the board. And now we have our meetings, which will be between April 11th and say May 5th, if we have another one the first week of May. Then between that time and June 1st, the staff needs to then draft some proposals that the board can look at and go back to them for direction with those options. And then that all has to happen by June 1st, because in order to hit our timelines, so required by law, any changes to zoning need to go to the County Planning Commission for them to review and provide a recommendation to the board. So they have specific meetings, and that's June 7th and June 20th. So we have to hit those timeframes, because if we don't, then we won't get the rest of the process done in time. Because after the Planning Commission, that's the yellow box, after the Planning Commission reviews it and they'll provide a recommendation to the board, then the staff's gonna need to go to the board with that recommendation, review everything with them and get direction. At some point, when they're comfortable with putting something out for public hearing, they're gonna direct us to schedule the hearing. And there's 3 weeks just between, lead time that you need when you start advertising before you can hold the hearing. And then they leave the record open for 10 days usually. And then they need to discuss and deliberate and decide. So that takes, the July through September, early September timeframe. So, and that's kind of an overview of the process. Anybody have any questions on it? And you can see under Planning Commission and the public hearing, there will be opportunity for other public to actually comment and provide input during that time. So I thought what might be helpful is to start out by understanding what the current requirements are for community solar in the agricultural zone. And what might actually be helpful is maybe not everybody even understands what community solar is. So let me start off with that. So in 2015, the state adopted a pilot program that at that time was only 3 years long, which was meant to allow for like these small scale compared to utility scale solar facilities, which at the time were capped at 2 megawatts in size. And the intention, the state has since increased it to 5 megawatts as a cap for the size. Carroll County's requirements are still capped at 2. But the idea is.
Can I ask you a question here?
Sure.
So how many homes does 5 megawatts cover? Average home, Carroll County?
Good
So
question.
if you have solar, if you have,
Laura
if you
Tyler?
have community solar,
Mhm.
how many homes would
that serve?
If you had 2 megawatt facility, about how many, like on average, how many homes do you think that would serve?
I think we usually say it's usually about a 5 kilowatt subscription. So, you know, a 5 megawatt facility might serve like 750 to 1,000 homes. Let me double check that, and I'll pipe up later if my my guess on that is wrong. I think that's what we typically say, though.
Excuse me, my understanding was that the 2 megawatt facilities would serve up to 400 homes.
Okay. So.
Yeah,
and
that tracks. That's about right.
that's strictly for residential use homes, or does that include any businesses or industrial?
Just residential is my understanding.
Only residential? Okay.
It can be small commercial, residential. It typically is a mix of the community. So there are ways for commercial industrial participants to participate as well.
Okay, so we're expanding it all.
Are we talking about subscriptions?
We're doing
Yes, that's the business model.
Right, so let me finish telling you what a community
I'm
solar
sorry,
is.
but
Yeah.
That's all right.
if I don't ask now, I'm gonna forget.
But all right, list solar. So the community solar is subscription based. So it's not, you know, the idea is that it provides the opportunity for somebody for their electricity to be solar generated without having the solar on their property. So, you know, the amount that say a residential subscriber could do is capped, and it's based on their average bill. And then, of course, the energy generated based on their subscription gets credited back to their utility bill. So most of Carroll County, that would be BG&E. So, and in some areas, there's also requirements that certain percentage of the subscriptions have to be available for low and moderate income families or households as well. But essentially, you know, the idea is the main points are that it's subscription based. You can subscribe to anywhere within your utility service area. So if you're a BGE customer, you can subscribe to a facility anywhere in the BGE area. It doesn't have to be just Carroll County. And you know, the amount that you can subscribe is capped based on the amount of your bill usually.
Is BG&E the only energy provider for Carroll County, or are there others?
No, we have a small portion that's Potomac Edison or
Okay.
Allegheny.
Oh, wait, okay.
The western part.
Now that you're open for questions.
Yes.
I understood Ralph's question, but when I watched the commission meeting the other week. Why do we care about how many megawatts limited versus the space that's allowed to take up? Who knows what the future is going to be? Maybe in the future, these things could produce 10 megawatts for the exact same footprint. So why are we worried about the amount of megawatts it produces? I can see putting a minimum on it for impact. But if technology says we can triple the production,
Well, I mean, and
why
that's
not?
something we can discuss in
Yeah,
applicability.
I thought maybe someone knew the answer to that.
The state capped it at 2 megawatts, and so we just kind of followed with that. But certainly that's something that can be
10 years from now,
discussed.
things will be
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, maybe you'll get twice as much in the same space. You know?
So the community solar just allows you as a homeowner to not buy into this, to be part of it. So it's not really a cooperative.
No.
You don't- they just
So
don't-
who owns the facility?
The solar.
Any of
company.
these
Solar
other
company.
100 companies that this lady talked about?
Yes, so it's a solar
So it could
company.
be a whole slew of companies. You could have 100 solar, community solar projects and 100 owners.
Yes, yeah. And one thing to, it's not binding, yeah. And one thing to think about it this way. So the electrons that are produced by the solar panels, right? It's sort of like water going into a reservoir. So those electrons go into the grid and so you're not, if you subscribe, so if you are in the BG&E network.
I'm sorry. Turn that thing off.
If you're in the BG&E service area and you subscribe to it, you're not necessarily getting those electrons from the specific solar panel. You're just getting electricity from the pool. It's just that financially, there's a business model that these companies are setting up, that they're generating electricity to put the electrons into the pool. So so they're not trying to draw from your community around where the solar panels are built. So that I think is a misconception that some people have had, is that, because I've heard lots of people say, well, I'm never going to subscribe to the solar panel that's going in next to my house. Well, that's not how it works. It's anybody in BG&E's service area can sign up for the community solar program, and they would get reduced rates based on these facilities.
It's confusing because they named it community
So,
solar.
Right.
that's right.
But the idea is that the community can
The community
access solar energy without having it on their property. That's why it's.
So Brenda, you mentioned the state. So has the state, I'm not going to use the word mandate at this point. Has the state put a number on what Carroll County should be advised to put in a solar,
Not
community
yet.
solar?
But it has been discussed in the legislature like 2 years in a row now.
I know.
Yeah,
So
I think
that's
that's
what I
what's
wanted.
important. This committee get its act together, because I'd rather do something before the state tells us what to do.
How big are their numbers of requirements? Or can
Well,
you
the
share it or
state
do you know?
wants to, the state has a goal, and I guess this was the last governor, but this governor isn't gonna probably make it less. So, of 100% renewable, 100% of the energy from renewable sources by either, was it 2035 or 2050?
Something like that.
Not a lot of time.
Yeah.
So they're gonna wanna see, that's gonna require a good bit of
Okay, so
renewable
what's,
sources.
so what's the penalty to Carroll County if we don't meet that goal? Because I'm not too much for mandates here. You know, the more mandates out there, the more I want to push back.
Well, the idea is that, so the Maryland Public Service Commission is the one that kind of approves energy-related projects. And so they have the authority to approve any of these projects, with or without local. And this is based on court decision. So without even having to go through the local process. But, what their policy so far has been that if you show good faith effort to provide opportunity for solar in your county, that they're going to follow your process and your requirements and kind of work with you. If you don't do that, then they're more likely to say, well, you're not providing any opportunities, so we're going to.
So I thought the Public Service Commission could only mandate projects that are for the greater good. So would you consider 400 homes out of all the homes in Carroll County for the greater good? So that's how they got the power to do that?
So
I mean, do you understand my question?
Yeah, I do. So correct me if I'm wrong, and we've got some solar folks here, so please jump in if we misspeak. We're not the experts in this, but so the Public Service Commission for a utility size solar facility requires a certificate of public
Convenience and
necessity.
Right.
Yeah, CPCN certificate, right? So that's only needed for those facilities that are larger than community solar. A community solar does not need a CPCN.
Okay, so now I want you to understand, I'm representing Farm Bureau here.
Yes.
So if there's a community solar facility that is right next to my farm,
Mhm.
and they can only get to the power source or the power receptacle
Mhm.
through my farm
Mhm.
that's under an easement.
Mhm.
The Public Service Commission has the right then to condemn my land and go through it to hook up that power grid into that power grid.
So I would differentiate community solar versus utility
Okay,
scale.
well, that's what I'm
So-
trying to do here.
Yeah, so community solar, the Public Service Commission does not, they get involved in that, they regulate it, but they do not require the CPCN. So community solar, it's up to the solar developers to figure out how they're going to tie their facility into the grid and all of that. Now, if it's a larger utility scale, so we're talking larger than 5 megawatts,
Okay.
then a CPCN is needed, that certificate is needed from the Public Service Commission. They can completely ignore local zoning requirements, and they can build the facility, they can allow the facility to be built through their process. I don't know if they have the authority of condemnation.
Okay, so if you have a permanent, irreversible land preservation easement on your property,
Mhm.
the Public Service Commission may have the right to condemn my property and go through it, even though it has been signed up as a permanent, irreversible easement.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if the PSC has condemnation authority.
I mean, that's big. The reason I'm asking this is when you look at the map and see all the AgPress properties, and some guys over here with a couple of remainders, and he's roaring, and the only place they can hook that up is through your property. There's something.
Yeah, so
Something we need to find out.
But again, Justin.
May I make a comment?
Sure,
So
please.
one of the criteria for your property to be selected for community solar is the proximity to the connection point to the grid. So of all the currently proposed projects, they're all right next to the grid and easily connectable. These community solar projects are not going to be placed in a position where they're going to have to expend money to connect to the grid. They're all right in areas that are easily connected. And that was one of the reasons why these particular properties were selected for these type of community solar projects.
Yeah, so I
The
think it's,
situation you're talking about may occur with those larger scale projects, but I don't think it would be economically feasible to do that on this type of community solar project.
that's correct.
This
Yeah.
2 megawatt.
That's why I want to make very sure that we're differentiating community solar versus utility scale.
That's what I need.
Yeah, utility scale, who knows what, I mean, I'm sure the PSC, we could find out for sure if they have condemnation rights and so on. But there you're talking about.
I was talking about community now.
Community is limited to 20 acres, right? 20 acres.
In our
Power
code.
grid, 20
Yeah,
Yes.
I want to clarify one other thing. And correct me if I'm wrong on the solar in here, but the CPCN is required over 2 megawatts in Maryland. Now, they used to be capped at 2 megawatts for community solar, and the state raised that to 5 megawatts. So community solar facilities that are over 2 megawatts will still be required to get a CPCN. But in Carroll, we capped it in the zoning code at 2 megawatts, and it can't change in our zoning unless the zoning changes. You know, the commissioners decide they're going to raise that. So that means that some community solar facilities would have to get a CPCN if they're somewhere else where they're, you know, doing one that's over 2 megawatts, because they can do them up to 5 megawatts in areas that don't cap it lower.
Can you honor, will the state allow you to honor the 2 megawatt maximum with them raising it now to 5?
They raised it a couple of years ago. Like, again, I'm assuming that if, as long as we're showing good faith effort to provide opportunities, that they're going to honor that.
So that, I mean, that was just a little background on, I mean, that was the whole reason why this code was passed, right? Was we wanted to control our destiny. We saw the writing on the wall that there's the potential of a lot more solar facilities being proposed in the county. So we wanted to look at where do we specifically want them and what kind of requirements do we want to put around them? So what kind of setbacks, what kind of landscaping, what decommissioning plans, all those sorts of things. The PSC can override all of those, but typically they won't do it unless they get into the CPCN.
Okay, Chris, so commercial operation does not need all the rules and regulations you talk about, like screening, talking about natural screening, trees.
They have to meet the requirements that are in a commercial industrial district, but not necessarily the same requirements that the community solar
Okay.
has.
Because, all right,
Yeah, because they're not allowed in the ag.
so if it was in an industrial, just a chain link fence will work, but in a community, you have.
We have additional requirements.
So that brings up the question, this is probably Pat could best answer this. I'm gonna sound stupid here, but just to make a point, why aren't these projects going to the commercial and industrial properties first? Why aren't they the low hanging fruit? And then it bleeds out into an interest. I don't see much interest there. I'm gonna make a bet that the rental rate for an agricultural property is significantly different than commercial or industrial.
Yeah.
And why is that?
The first,
I
I mean, it's
don't
not
know.
commercial industrial
Well, it
land
depends on
available.
what you're satisfied with. It's just like if you rented your farm.
Right,
And one guy comes in and said, I'll give you $200 an acre to rent it.
right.
The next guy comes in and says, I'll give you 4.
Well, my
You might
point-
be happy with the 2.
There's a significant difference in the interest that Tom's pointing out, and pocket to the ag side as opposed to the commercial or industrial zoning.
It's still land is cheaper.
Because
And I still say,
Because of the.
why is that?
But there also is not very much commercial industrial land available.
There's my one question. Is it availability only issue, or is it
It's-
agriculture is going to bend too quick?
It's a little bit of both, and a lot of one and most of the other.
Is it suitable for solar? Is it
Yeah.
on the hill facing north or south?
Yes, I'm aware of
So
that.
that's part of it also.
Yeah, there's a lot of suitability criteria too, that 19,000 acres that is remaining portions, never would it all be actually done because it's just not, like, I guess what Laurel mentioned, you know, it should be within a certain distance of, you know, the distribution lines, and it has to have the right slopes and solar access and environmental constraints, and there's state requirements in terms of adjacency and when the remaining portion was created. And so there's all these things that will, and cost, you know, if it's too far away, they're not going to pay for that
Right,
size.
so-
That
That
one
was
all
going to
the
be
way.
my point about what you asked, if they would run through your property, that would probably be, depending on how large your property is, cost prohibitive to the solar
I know
developers.
public service has an awful lot of, I don't know what you call it, clout, that they can do an awful lot of things to you, and you don't have any recourse.
Right.
Let's see, I had a very pertinent question, I forgot it.
can I,
Yes.
Ralph, clarify? He said something about you only being able to subscribe, being a landowner. That's not true. You can be a renter in an apartment. I mean, you, as long as,
And
so it has,
citizens.
This
yeah,
doesn't have a
any
utility
citizen.
bill.
It has nothing to do with whether you are, you know, an owner or a landowner. So it opens it up to Baltimore City, you know, people in multiple housings, and there are
And that's
opportunities.
where the low moderate
for-
income comes in, because
Yes,
people, not everybody had property they could put solar on, and this way they still have access to the energy.
and that's a big point on the marketing and the business angle. That's where it goes. And there's a whole other side of it, and that's the agricultural.
So if you have
Two sides
a,
of the same coin.
yeah, thank you for doing that. So if you have a 25 acre remainder, you can put it on 20 to 25, or is there a ratio involved here? So if you have
No,
a
that's just-
200.
Maybe we should go through the current requirements.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm getting ahead of myself.
And then you can maybe put your questions in the context of what we
I'm
have
sorry,
here. And maybe I could
You
try
might
to.
Tell me when I'm
Okay.
You have the floor.
Maybe that'll answer some questions.
Okay,
you know.
sorry.
No, It's all good. That's why we're here. Good discussion.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we've talked about isn't necessarily going to be covered in what our current requirements are, so. So the page where it says overview of existing Carroll County community solar requirements. So I've just got this information bulleted here, like a summarized. So again, the definition of community solar, it's the CSEGS, Community Solar Energy Generating System that came from the state definition. And we follow their definition of what it is, of what that type of facility is and what it does. And so we just reference that in the law. In terms of location, so it's currently a principal permitted use on remaining portions 5 acres or greater in the agricultural zone. Now, there's several things that are in there. Let me just go through the 3 points and then I'll get back to it. And on that remaining portion, only a maximum of 20 acres can be used for the solar facility, and that includes the entire facility. So it's not just the panels, but it's the inverter, the access road, the landscape buffer, everything associated with that facility has to fit on the 20 acres. And then only remaining portions that already existed as of July 1st, 2020 are eligible. And the reason for that is we didn't want to see people subdividing and creating remaining portions just for the purpose of doing this. So if you go back to the first point, the reason it was made a principal permitted use is because, tried to put as many requirements as we could in it, and if you already had to meet all those, then there weren't as many conditions to have to put on it.
I could interrupt just for a second. Not everybody may know what a principal permitted use is. So there are 3 categories of whether something can be on, a use can be on a piece of property. It can be not allowed. It can be principal permitted, which means it's allowed, or it can be a conditional use. A conditional use, don't think of that as a maybe. Think of that as, yes, you can have it, but you need to go before the Board of Zoning Appeals for a special meeting, which is a public meeting, and the Board of Zoning Appeals can apply additional criteria to your project.
Would that include sunsets?
Sunsets as in
Like
how long?
in 10 years, we have to rethink it.
Yes, yep, they can put any sort of criteria on it
Not
Thank you.
necessarily after it's installed.
right, no, this would all be prior
That's my
to.
question. Is this a temporary or is this a permanent structure?
So that would have to be written into
Right.
if it were a conditional use. So if you went to the Board of Zoning Appeals, they could apply a condition that after so many years, something needs to happen. So they have great latitude, and Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, but they have great latitude in the requirements that they can add to that use on that property.
That's correct.
However, community solar was approved as a principal permitted use, which means that it's allowed. If someone wants to develop it, they do not need to go before the Board of Zoning Appeals. They go through a regular development process, which has a lot of phases of review by Planning and Zoning Commission, review by technical staff, and so on. So there's a large process, but they don't have to go before BZA for that conditional use. So hopefully that explains everything. So there are 3 choices: no, yes, and
With
yes
conditions.
with conditions.
I thought once the project went beyond the TRC meetings and went beyond the regulations, that then it had to go to zoning as just a matter of
So.
Well,
process.
that's further down in the
Oh.
bullets.
But no, it's good, but it's funny, I mentioned this to Brenda, I
He
said,
started it.
we all, like, staff deal with this day in, day out, so it's second nature to us, and that's why I wanted to stop and just make sure that, because I recognize you don't all deal with it. So there are 2 different panels, or 2 different boards that we often talk about. One is the Board of Zoning Appeals, and one is the Planning and Zoning Commission. They're 2 different entities. So a conditional use needs to go before the Board of Zoning Appeals. As part of a regular process, all projects, all development projects have to go before the Planning and Zoning Commission. So it's a different board. So as a principal permitted use, there's a process that it goes through, and it would actually go before the Planning and Zoning Commission twice. One for a concept review as far as, hey, this is conceptually what we want to do, and see if they have any comments. And then once is a final approval. Is that clear, thanks?
It is.
Good. Sorry, Dan.
So, all right, principal permitted.
Yes.
On remaining portions, and that was chosen by the previous board as the properties to target. We set it at 5 acres or greater because, I mean, 1 megawatt averages like 5 acres of panels, and it just didn't make sense to have anything smaller. And then again, I already talked about the 20 acre, maximum for that.
Is everybody crystal clear as to what a remaining portions is? Yeah.
So you've taken, basically, it means you have property, you've got residential development rights, and you've taken residential development, some of those rights, some or all, and the property that's left after you've taken them is the remaining portion.
Is this where we jump in and give our opinions?
Not yet,
This is
but.
not yet.
We'll forget it.
I will get to, this will fall under applicability.
Right, okay.
Easement. The facility, in order to do the community solar, the property owner then has to put the rest of the property that's not, designated for solar into a conservation easement. And that was done for a number of reasons. The primary reason was that there was a concern expressed from the community that these facilities would expand in the future. And they did, right. So if this happens, what if they expand? So the primary reason for requiring that conservation easement was to ensure that they couldn't expand. So that what you got to begin with was, that's what you got. You're not getting more later there. Then, of course, I know it's been talked about the, getting ag preservation, helping with the easements towards our goal and on. And yes, it does that, but that wasn't really the reason, the primary reason why it was done. So that is the main reason why.
Can I ask what is actually, so what is not allowed is more solar. What is allowed on an easement once the solar has gone and you've got the easement?
Very
left?
little.
Very little.
Essentially, and continued use as
Agriculture.
Agriculture.
Like if you wanted to have a big barn put up or.
Well, that's agriculture, yes.
That's agriculture.
But here's, that's a great question. But here's my question then. If you put solar on a 100 acre remainder, then the easement is on the rest of it. How about if it's a 21 acre remainder, then you put an easement on 1 acre?
The remaining amount of land had to be a minimum acreage. I don't have that on here, but there was a minimum acreage for that. Yeah.
Okay, so you have to, so you would put an easement on 5 acres, but not on 4.
Correct.
But then on the 4 acres, Jay, other things can happen on a remainder. You could put a church there, you could put a veterinary clinic there, you could put a.
I have a whole list
contractor's
in the
yard
back
there.
of your packet.
There's a whole lot of
So,
Not to get
on
off.
that
okay,
non-preserved piece, yes. But there is a limit now too,
a limit.
to development of remaining portions. Commissioners just passed a maximum number of uses for remaining portions.
Yeah, because
The two, and it's so many per acre. So I think you can have one for the first 40 acres, I think it is, and then a second one above that. So if that, you had that 5 acre section that was not in that, not preserved, you already have one use on that remaining portions.
You're done.
You're done.
So
You couldn't put a
the
second one.
commissioners then hold that easement.
Yes.
That easement's held by the county.
Yes. Yep.
I'd like to clarify something though. In my particular case, and I believe in others, I still have one building right left. And other properties do as well. So a home could be built and the solar facility could be built on the same property.
But you don't have a remainder. If you have.
I do have a remainder.
If you have more residential rights, then.
I have one residential right on my remainder property.
Well, but you're not dealing with a remainder then.
It is
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
You don't
It's
have
still
to.
building rights on her. property.
Yeah, but
But
it's
there's
not,
no
it's
other
not an
reason.
extra one.
I understand what you're saying.
The
It's not
remaining,
an extra one.
the
If
remaining,
that property was originally to have 7 houses on it,
They've taken 6.
they've taken 6 and they have 1 left.
So this is just one more phase of development on our property.
That's correct.
Till it's developed out to nothing.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, a remaining portion doesn't have to be where all development rights have been exhausted. So you could have 100 acres and you could develop 2 properties, 2 lots on it. It would still be considered a remaining
I
portion.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just wanted to clarify.
So the next point is this, all of these facilities require a site plan to be submitted well, let me back up for 1 second. First, they need to get approval from the utility company and for most of the county and the BTE to connect into their system. Then they're gonna need to get PSD approval, and then they can submit a site plan to our development review staff. And the development review staff coordinate the review and all the agencies who are involved in those reviews of the project against the federal, state, and local laws to make sure they're complying with everything. And so like the TRC, the Technical Review Committee meetings is one of those where the agencies are discussing comments, but the public can be at those. Then once they have those comments all discussed and give them back, the next step really is that they submit the first phase of a plan for the Planning Commission review, which is the concept plan. And then, you know, eventually the final review and the Planning Commission approves something. But it's up to the Planning Commission to actually provide that final approval. So they can't build it until they get that.
Is there any limit to the number of times, if you're not approved the first time through the permit, how many times you have to go through that? One of the properties, actually, is Spring Valley Solar. I understand from Chris, if I remembered you right, that there have been 5 site plans that have been denied. So how many times can this just go on?
So there's the technical review by the agencies, right? And so what happens is, so they make an initial submission. And all the agencies get that submission. We have a technical review committee meeting, which is the public meeting where all the agencies talk to the developer. The next kind of formal step is that concept review with Planning Commission. However, the developer needs to address all of the concept comments that are made by the review agencies before it can go to Planning and Zoning Commission for the concept review. That process could take 5, 6, 7 review cycles, however many it takes for them to address all of the technical comments from the technical agencies. So there's really no limit. So
you don't draw the line anywhere.
No.
But that's costing them money.
Yeah.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So it's basically, you're required to do this. You haven't done this yet, so you can't move forward. So go back to the drawing board, fix it, and submit it to us again. And we'll just keep doing that until you give us a plan that can be approved from a concept perspective that can then go to the Planning Commission. Because we're not going to take something to the Planning Commission that doesn't meet state, local, federal laws.
I wonder if the person from the energy provider, are there some times when the energy company just gives up because they do not feel they can ever meet the requirements for that particular area? That's, I guess, my question.
It's very possible.
It's very possible. They could just say, I'm spending enough money and I'm just going to give it up.
Yep.
Well, I know that. I've had lots of offers on my end.
Not just with the solar company, even other companies,
For
that
other
gets to the point that it's too expensive, we're dropping
For
out.
the engineers.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what have you
So it has to
seen
come from them.
at the high number where they
Yeah.
kind of?
As far as reviews,
Yeah.
oh my goodness.
Really?
Not necessarily solar, but other types
Other
of
types
development
of companies,
projects.
yeah.
We've got projects that are 3-4 years in the process because they just can't address all
Are those
the
large projects like?
Very,
Some
very
of
technical.
them,
Very
very
technical.
technical, yeah.
And then some of them don't have, like, with the community solar, we spelled out a lot of the requirements. Not all types of uses have those kind of requirements spelled out. So, you know, they know coming in, just from the zoning, that they have all these things to meet, whereas other projects, you know, they don't have that, and it comes out in the process. And then one thing to also note, you know, Chris mentioned that the Board of Zoning Appeals can put additional conditions on if it's conditional use. Even a principal permitted use, when a site plan goes to the Planning Commission, they also have the authority to put on whatever condition, extra additional, conditions that they feel are needed. So, you know, there could be, this is what's in zoning, and the Planning Commission says, and you're going to do this, this, and this as well. So.
And that quite often is driven by public comment, right? These are public meetings. And so if they hear from the public that, especially at the concept that traffic, we're worried about traffic, and that we think the developers should do X, Y, and Z. Well, if the Planning Commission hears that enough, they can put additional requirements on that development for what they feel needs to be done to address that issue, traffic, or it could be anything. It could be landscaping, it could be stormwater management. It could be any sort of criteria. That's up to the planning commission. They have the authority to put additional requirements above and beyond what's required by the code.
All right, so the next point, environmental resources, the main thing there is not allowed to clear forested areas for the solar facility, and it can't be located within or impede stream buffers, floodplains, or wetlands. Then there's the co-location requirement, and this was something not a lot of people in Maryland were doing
Excuse me,
it.
Brenda, you're on environmental resource. I want to
Yes.
stop. Next
Sure.
question. So when it goes to stormwater, are they under the same requirements as any runoff as far as how much runoff comes from a solar panel that does not absorb anything, just runs somewhere?
Yes.
And the land underneath it, there's only certain areas that it'll run to, so they're under. So what kind of guidelines did you determine on that? Is it the surface of the panels themselves, and then you calculate that from that? Is it?
So the state of Maryland has actually provided specific guidance for stormwater management on solar panels.
Okay.
And I don't want to quote because I'll misquote it, but essentially, if you construct the panels in certain orientations so that they're with the contours of the hillside and so on, so that when water runs off the panels, it then sheet flows on the grass that's underneath the next row of panels below and so on. I believe that meets most of the criteria for stormwater management because that runoff is running through vegetated areas. But if you do something different where you're concentrating the flows and it's not parallel to the hillside, then you have to basically view the panels as all being impervious, and you've got to provide whatever stormwater management requirements are that as if that was all impervious.
Okay, so there's no restriction on the degree of slope that you can put these on.
I
So if
think
you
there
ever,
is. I think it has to be flatter than 5%, if I'm remembering correctly.
okay,
We can provide you with that specific guidance.
Or stormwater management.
Or stormwater management needs to be provided.
So you could have a hill.
Yeah, you could have a hill, but
what
then
I'm saying is 20 acres of surface. I mean, I know
The
it's not
impervious
all
part.
20 acres.
Yeah.
But let's just say it's 15 of the 20. Of flat surface like that creates a tremendous amount of
Impervious
stormwater
area.
runoff. So on my farm, I have to have an environmental plan. I have to have a conservation plan on all my fields.
Right.
Based on all that, I have to have vegetation covers against stream buffers, the whole 9 yards. I have to buffer my streams. That has to be a huge consideration. You're talking about 15 acres
yes,
of surface like that or slicker that absorbs nothing.
that's a good document that we can provide to you all, is the
But it has to be
MDE guidance.
And if that stormwater is on the 15, say the 15 acres, if it has to have a stormwater pond or a stormwater type, some type of facility, that has to be confined within that 20 acres.
Yes.
Okay. Just trying to figure this out.
Oh,
that's
yes,
all.
yeah. No, absolutely. That's why we're here. Yeah.
No, that was a good question, and because stormwater has come up before, so. So, because, these are in agricultural zone, co-location requirements were built in to the requirements here, so that that property still had some use, like agricultural use continued in, along with the solar. And there were two options then made available. So one was, you're planting, managing, or maintaining, like raising of animals, apiaries, or crops. And I don't mean row crops with a tractor, but some kind of produce. Or you can apply for and maintain so Maryland has a solar generation facilities pollinator friendly designation. And that's where they would plant pollinator friendly, like flowers and stuff underneath the panels. And the idea there is, apiaries is one thing that's allowed, that the agriculture need bees. for pollination. So that would also help support agriculture. So those were the two things. So you can't have just the panels, you actually have to have one of these uses along with the panels.
Who's gonna monitor that? Because,
The landowner,
yeah, right.
is that in the law?
So,
Is the landowner
Well-
responsible
well,
for maintenance
You know what
underneath the
Johnson
solar
grass
panels
is, don't you?
within their parameter?
Yeah. so this, all of
Johnson grass friendly.
this would be on the site plan, right? And so the site plan that the developer needs to produce would indicate what it is they're proposing to do. If they don't, if Johnson Grass takes over, right,
It will.
that would be a violation of their site plan. So somebody could complain, it's complaint driven. Carroll County is we're complaint driven. We do not have, Jay is our zoning administrator. He does not have a police force that's going out and looking for problems. We are complaint driven. So when Jay gets a complaint, so if Johnson Grass took over a site, Jay would get a complaint. Someone would go out and investigate. If they're not in compliance with the site plan, that then is a zoning violation, and it would be taken care of through the zoning process.
And that goes just not for, like, say, pollination, that would go for any part of the site plan. It's not involved. The landscaping screening dies and it's not doing its job. That would be a site plan violation. We would contact them and tell, hey, guess what? You gotta fix it.
What would be the penalty if they did not?
We have penalties in the code. Theoretically, we can go up to $1,000 a day, theoretically.
Your plan also has bonding against that.
Yes,
correct?
it has that bonding one too.
I'll get to that in the decommissioning.
But like I said, there isn't a penalty. We'd rather have them fix it than fine them. But that would be our primary thing, is getting them to fix it to make it right.
I have a very silly question,
There are no
because
silly
it's very
questions.
pertinent. Are you prepared, your staff, for the inundation of feedback from all these facilities that are going to be going up, the solar facilities? And I don't know how many complaints that you get, but it's almost going to behoove you that you're going to have to look forward to expanding certain criteria. And when we get into decommissioning and stuff, you know that that's a really, really big issue, because no one wants to own it. It's supposed to be owned by somebody, but it really isn't. Okay.
Yep.
That was just, we can put a bug in the commissioner's ears for their next year's 2025 budget.
Yeah.
Just like
I'll keep your name on your file, so that if we need to go and request more staff, I
Just
will.
look all of us up.
Yep.
Nobody scratches other back.
But we don't,
Yeah.
but we honestly don't anticipate it needing that.
Yeah, well, I remember early on, there was a question about how high do the weeds get before you can, and I thought I remembered a foot. So I know my neighbor and I were gonna be on, weed patrol and go out with our measuring sticks and measure it. So, there's a lot of relevance.
Like the old song, how high is a water bomb?
The other thing is the property, there is some onus on the property owner in their lease agreement to ensure that there are things built into that with the solar company. So, things that the solar company might, be required to do based on that lease agreement or the contract, they also can legally enforce through the courts that way as well.
That is one of my questions. Is the lease agreement part of the plan? Because you can have 20 different lease agreements out there.
No.
Yeah, the
So
county doesn't
we're
get
not
involved
getting
in
involved in
contracts.
the approval process, it's not a review of the lease agreement.
If they're in violation of the site plan now, we would tell the property
The
owner
property owner, that's
that
right.
there's a problem. And then it would be
Not
between the
developer.
property owner and developer to get it settled.
And we do require that the owner and the developer are both signing those plans. And
Yes.
as we go through the entire process, they're part of the initial. And
But the recourse is the landowner.
Yes.
Yes, for everything, yes.
All right, landscape buffer. The current requirement is to provide year-round screening from residential uses on contiguous properties and public rights of way. And then in the code, it actually says from time of installation. Has to incorporate plantings and berms to blend with the natural landscape. So it wouldn't be the kind of flowers and, like ornamental shrubs that you might see at a business. So it's supposed to blend in more with the landscape. And it could be placed in the setback, and the perimeter fence, any fencing that's around the facility would be inside that landscape, so you wouldn't be able to see it. Bulk requirements currently, the minimum setback is 40 feet from the property line, and then maximum height is 15 feet, and one of the reasons for that height was so that you could, it's high enough to graze underneath it and get, to grow things. And then the abandonment and decommissioning requirements. So the decommission plan is required. If panels aren't used for 180 consecutive days, they have to be decommissioned and removed. And the county requires that a public works agreement be developed with the county, which also comes along with getting a bond or a guarantee from them, so that if that isn't done by them at the time, the county's holding their money in order to do it themselves.
Okay, so I'm no authority on these solar companies, but I do know that they change hands quite often. So it could be put in by solar company A, and by the time there may be a problem, it could be solar company D. So who monitors the ownership and the string of events where it changes and these? So are these bonds, whose name is on the bond?
Okay,
Names on it, but is it the landowner? Is it the solar company? Who is then responsible if something happens and you have to?
So we're always going to go,
exercise that bond?
we're always going to go after the landowner, right? Because that doesn't change, right? And actually the landowner could change. We're going after the property, right? The site plan applies to the property. So say the solar panels go into stop being used, and they're whatever for 180 days. We get a complaint that they're not being maintained and so on. We would then initiate conversations with the current property owner that they are in non-compliance with the site plan, and that per the county code and site plan requirements, they need to decommission the solar field. If for some reason we get pushback from the property owner and so on, and it's not happening, the county is holding money that we can use to then decommission the solar panels. Now, in theory, if everything goes swimmingly and these panels are in place for 20 years, and then the solar company decides, okay, we're done, we're going to pull out, and they remove everything, we would give that bond back then, as long as it's put back to basically the agricultural condition it was prior to the start.
I just want to clarify that this is what we're scrapping. We're scrapping this.
Yes.
Heard with the commissioners.
Reviewing it.
Usually what we were going to talk about later.
Right,
Because
but
we're
let
only
me just say that you
I
might
think
not,
it's important that we go through it, but I don't think that we need to, talk about every detail, because we're going to start.
but you need to understand what it is and why
And
it's
why we
there.
did it. And I think that this is part of the reason that these remaining portions have been low hanging fruit, and that so many solar companies have come in because it's been.
Exactly right. That's it.
And so I just don't want to spend too much time.
Well, I agree with you, but I will say this, in my career, I financed a lot of solar back in the early 2000s. And I was a credit guy, and the marketing people said, you're just too hard. Because you gotta understand how this started. It all started that the government has put our utility companies, all the gas suppliers and whatnot, to provide a certain percentage of their energy, which is alternative energy. So all of a sudden, solar panels were going up on roofs everywhere. You could, every dairy farm, every poultry unit, we were seeing, and they were expensive. Did they return energy? Yes. Did they return a profit? Only because, and we're having this still, only because there was tax incentive credits, and they were marketable. And they started out at $450 a credit. And I said, well, once the utility companies meet their quota, then they won't have to buy as much, supply and demand. The price of that credit will come down. We watched it go from $450 a credit down to $32 a credit. And And that's why I say, whatever we do today, think about 10 years down the road. Because if you're not aware, this is being subsidized. These whole projects are being subsidized. You take the subsidy out, I'd like to see green energy too, but it doesn't return a profit. Or Baltimore Gas would be doing it right now themselves. So whatever we write, we have to think about, what do we give you guidance? We have to think about 7 years from now, 10 years from now, not today. So when these subsidies come off, we're going to see landowners having some issues. That's my concern.
Ma'am, one reason why I'm digging in the weeds here, and I'll take the blame for that, is that I have a theory that you don't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. So what I'm trying to find out is what's the guts of this that we're scrapping, and why would we? So I think the more we understand the thinking behind putting all this down, the better off we're going to be. So bear with us here.
I'm not saying anything against your comments or questions or anything like that. I'm just saying we have been through it. We've been through it a lot.
I agree with you. Big picture though.
And if we're only going to, if we, the community members of this group are only going to be here for 4 meetings, I just don't want to, and I hate this expression, but beat a dead horse,
We're just providing some background, and now we're going to be moving on to discussing where is it, what's the vision you all have of where you'd like this to be.
Well, let me just last comment for me for a while. So I started out by asking what I thought would sound like a dumb question. But everything we do, if you think about listening to what crowds say and whatnot, the requirements of landowners and whatnot, is an expense that the commercial industrial guys already know. And that's why their rent is higher than the low hanging fruit, which I'm going to say is the poor farmer in this case, being slightly duped. I don't know how else to say it. I'm afraid they would be duped. I don't want to see the landowners some years from now having a serious economic problem mitigating something. So it is kind of good that, I understand the bonding thing. That was important to me to see that. There's something out of parity here in my mind, because commercial and industrial properties aren't sitting at this table. Why is it just agriculture?
Well, because the zoning text amendment was written for ag remainder portions. And that's why the solar companies contacted owners of ag remainder portions. So a text amendment solar is allowed on commercial land, and the economics of it, frankly, don't work. That land is too valuable to put this type of facility on. You don't have the return on your investment. And frankly, there's too little of it in Carroll County as it is. And if we put solar farms on industrial land, we're not going to have the industrial tax base that Carroll County is going to need in the future. And that's why we're at the table today, because the tax amendment was written for ag remainder portions. And the economics of that is not what we're here to debate.
And I can tell you farmers that are sitting here at the table, I'm sure knows this too, the number of people that we have spoken to, they have your backs. They have your backs. They're looking out for you if nobody else does. That's the way the citizens are talking. And Chris knows this from the things that he's done.
Absolutely.
So there's some light in the dark.
All right. So the next document in your packet says issues raised at the top. We're not going to go over this at the meeting today. This is more just for your information, but just so that, to give you an idea of what this is, so you'll recall Commissioner Bigliotti had the 19 points or whatever the number was, that the commissioners said, yeah, let's address these points. So what we've done is we've gone through here, and for each of those points, either indicated what the current law or requirement might be on this, or it might be something that we can't do or we can't address for some reason. It might be legally we can't do it or whatever, or it's something we're going to discuss. So those things, that's all written out in here just for you to review, when you're between meetings, this meeting and next or whatever. But the,
homework
When are we going to discuss them at the next
at the
meeting?
next meeting.
wait. But all the topics that are in here have been put into our discussion outline. So it's not, we're not, this was more for your information. It's not that we're not addressing the topics, we're just, I pulled them out separately rather than going through them in this format. That make sense?
As long as we get to discuss it.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
No problem. We've already done that. We've done our homework already.
Good.
Which means we are at the discussion topics part of our agenda. So if you go to the document that's a table with white and
Yeah. it looks like
orange
this.
line.
Throw mine at you.
Yeah.
Let's-
Yes.
So as I mentioned earlier, today, we've got two different sort of types of information to talk about. One is applicability and the other specific criteria. The applicability really applies to where things will be allowed. And then the specific criteria are, all right, once we know it's allowed on this property, here's the requirements it has to meet. So today we want to start just by talking about applicability. Because it's, so we're focusing on one type of information here. So there's a number of different topics within applicability. And, we've got what areas in the ag zone should be eligible? Is productive soils something that we want to make a criteria? Proximity to other zoning districts and uses, proximity to environmental features, should there be a maximum area? The 20 acre now should be something else. Should there be a cap county-wide on facilities? These are the kinds of things that we'll talk about in terms of where they can go. So on those topics are on the left. On the right, I just threw down potential, options to start the discussion. They are in no way meant to be like, here's what we're going to discuss. Just here's some ideas to start with to get the discussions going. So now we can start talking about what you want to see. So we'll start with eligible areas in the ag zone. And so as you know, currently it's remaining portions only. So do we continue with that? Do we make it anywhere in the ag zone if they can meet all the criteria that you come up with later? Do we, have a minimum or maximum size for the parcel that it would be allowed on?
You want to start from the first one? No, not using the ag remainders is an excellent thing to start from. Because an ag remainder, if it's a remainder of a construction of a residential area, then an ag remainder automatically butts it right up to a residential property. And that is very difficult to regulate that. Your buffers and all the things that you may want to do are not going to work. So our contention, and Sheriff agrees with me, and a lot of people do, they say this was not an appropriate place to target because it made the solar companies right away focus on that area, which is why we have 8 now, all on ag remainders.
And by the nature of ag remainders, they lend themselves, as in that side to the development that took place, making it a remaining portion.
Sure.
But I do want to point out that some of those developments are also zoned agriculture. So we have to be careful with saying that they shouldn't be next to residential zoned property.
Right.
And that's why we're going to talk about the difference between the zone and a use a little bit later on, because it is an important distinction.
Yeah, because my property is agriculture.
Sure.
And we're next to the remaining portion.
Yeah.
As, so are the other people that I represent.
And that's something that the commissioners pointed out when we were talking with them, right? Is that they didn't want us to focus strictly on the ag-remaining portions. They said, we're opening this to all agricultural zone, but we're staying with agricultural zone. So
that was so confusing to me. That whole meeting was really confusing. It went back, it went from Commissioner Buren saying no ag, and I think Kyler and Bigliotti also, Commissioners Kyler and Bigliotti also saying no ag. And then to the end of the meeting, it was, so we're, you were trying to clarify and saying all ag. So that meeting was very confusing to me.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I took the same thing away from it that you did.
Well, so basically where we are today is that all agriculturally zoned property is on the table. And so what we're looking for from discussion from you all is, are there any other criteria that we want to use to remove certain properties, as it were?
From all ag.
From all ag.
From all ag.
Yeah.
So you're talking about rezoning now.
No, we're not rezoning.
Not zoning the property, just the text.
If you're taking properties from the ag zone to other uses, you're talking about rezoning.
No, that's where the.
Tell me the difference then.
Okay, so
We're going to
zoning,
do that discussion now.
Like, if you have the ag remainder, you put a commercial contractor's equipment storage on it, it's still ag zone. It's not rezoned for a commercial use. It's still ag zoning.
So we're adding or detracting uses from the ag zone that that's
That is
agreed to find.
ordinance.
Right, the uses that are allowed. in
Yes. We're saying whether we're going to allow it or not, but it's still going to be ag zone.
The eligibility of that transaction.
Actually,
So since we're talking about that, then I want you to keep in mind that this county and the state has spent hundreds of millions of dollars in Carroll County to protect as much ag land as possible. That's how important it was to every ensuing commissioner since 1978 to protect as much ag land as possible. That made for this community to be what it is. So we have to keep that in mind. It's, it might be butterflies and Johnson grass, but believe me, that was a huge instrument that was used to make Carroll County, not Howard, Harford, Baltimore, and now Frederick, which are gone. And ag is on the verge on every one of those counties. They've determined here, we keep chipping away at what we have in the ag zone with all this malarkey, we got a problem. That's why they tied this 20-acre bit to the remainders, because that would be one tool to use to keep ag instead of chipping away at it here, there, and everywhere. So we really have to keep that in mind. If the citizens of the county want to chip away all this and make ourselves Howard and Baltimore, which Howard, you could write a textbook on Howard County on what not to do. That's the one we always use to say, we ain't doing that as we move forward.
So
we have to keep that in mind.
Absolutely. And two good points to tie into that. One is that this does not apply to any preserved farms, right? So
I understand that.
The other thing is, in your packets at the end, we provided a list from the zoning code as far as what uses are allowed on agricultural property. So just for your reference. So you can see the table here of all the various things that can be constructed on agricultural property. It does not change the zoning. These are just uses that are allowed. Everybody follow
I have
that?
two points I'd like to make.
Yes,
First,
sure.
we haven't talked about the ag preservation portion of the zoning text amendment. So in my particular case, my ag property is 125 acres. We would lease 15 of those to the solar developer. So therefore, 110 acres would be put into agricultural preserve, moving towards meeting Carroll County's code goal of 100,000 acres in agricultural preserve. So a very important part of this text amendment was helping Carroll County meet that ag preservation goal. And we haven't mentioned that. In my particular case, 110 acres, it goes a long way to meeting that goal. The other point I want to make is if you take this permitted principal use away from ag properties, what's to say that ag properties could be used for anything? I'm sure my adjoining neighbors would not be happy with a church or a mosque or a nursing home, and they would have the same complaints. So if you take this away, you've almost taken away any type of development right on my property. And what does that mean for property owners in Carroll County? And where are my property rights? We pursued this solar farm development in good faith based on Carroll County approving and publicly debating this text amendment before it was put in place. So I really think there's some measures we need to talk about here very carefully as we proceed.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and so, as Brenda mentioned earlier, the conservation easement that you mentioned that goes on the remainder of the property. Yes, that a secondary goal of that was to increase the amount of preserved land. But the primary goal was to limit the expansion of the solar facility. So you're talking about 15 acres that you'd be leasing for solar production. What we wanted to avoid was a future board changing the code and saying, well, it's now 20 acres maximum, let's increase it to 40 acres. And then your facility, which went through a whole approval to be 15 acres, now all of a sudden expands to 30 and so on. So that was the intent of the conservation easement around it, is that it's limited to 20 acres that's associated with the solar facility and can't grow beyond that. A secondary benefit, like you said, is the improvement to, or addition to the preserved land in the county. So,
Chris,
yeah,
if you have two 100-acre farms that are owned by the same person, to get, and you could have 20 on one, 20 on the other, you can't put 40 on one and none on the other.
No, so interesting. So when this the county code was passed, there was a state law that said that community solar could not be on adjoining properties. So you could not have a 20-acre facility on one property and another 20 acres on another property. So we did not put it in our code to have that restriction. Now, however, the state, they passed it, or is it being considered?
Well, the state legislature finished yesterday, and honestly, getting ready for this meeting, I haven't had time to check the bills. Just see what passed. But
it was being proposed to eliminate that restriction that
Or
would
it-
allow.
yeah, it would allow adjoining facilities, but there was a cap, like, you could have it on adjoining, but you still, like, all of them together couldn't be more than 5 or 10 or whatever the number was.
I thought it's a contiguous, that they could not be contiguous.
That's adjoining
Yeah.
contiguous.
Yeah.
Same.
Same thing.
Yeah.
But what is there ever a guarantee that if you have a conservation versus preservation, they're different?
No.
They're not different?
We're not talking about zoning,
Yeah.
we're talking about an easement, and they both restrict the use.
Okay, but what's the difference between conservation, so, the conservation that is what I understood was, and putting it in ag preservation?
So
That's
Ralph
big,
Ralph
big
can talk,
difference.
yeah, Ralph can talk for hours about what ag
I'm
preservation is. So
You don't demand that it go into preservation, that would be just a murder.
no, it sort of is,
It's
right?
sort of-
So let me see if I can.
Ag
So-
preservation is a type of conservation easement.
Okay,
Yes.
but
So the ag preservation program, which the county runs, right, we pay property owners to eliminate the development rights on their property. And an easement is put over top of their property. And that is in perpetuity, goes into land records, they cannot develop on that property. The conservation easement that is part of this text amendment essentially is the same thing. It's the same sort of easement is put on that property, so it can't be developed. We're just not paying for it. So the end result is the same. They're both conservation easements. It's just an ag preservation easement is kind of went through our program. A conservation easement came about as part of this process. But the end result is the same, that there's an easement over that portion of the property that cannot be developed in perpetuity.
All right, but for certain things, they can develop. I mean, if you need to add another barn because your farm.
That's an
That's
agricultural.
an agricultural thing,
Yes.
so, there is really no difference between the two. Okay,
Yes.
I thought conservation was less restrictive
No.
in terms of.
But they both actually start with the same basic easement language.
Yes.
Okay, all
Mhm.
right.
Yeah.
So if it's related to agriculture, again, you have free reign to do what you want there, which is getting pretty close to the agriculture.
Well,
which-
Yeah, well,
Yes and no.
so community solar is considered a commercial use. So that's not permitted on an ag preserve property. So which is
Yes.
why we're not talking, so ag preserved farms are off the table.
Right.
Personal use, so if a farmer wants to install as an accessory some solar panels for their own use,
Mhm.
that would be considered part of their farm, and so they'd be allowed to do that.
Right. Okay, I understand.
Did I get it right?
Yes.
You got it
And anything that's on a preserved farm has to be approved, the location has to be approved on a non-farmable area.
Mhm.
That's first choice, and then you go from there. So it would be allowed on a roof of your cattle shed, roof of your house, whatever, or around the curtilage of the farm, the farmstead
On a
area,
hill that you don't use.
or on a non-productive part of the farm, to a certain extent. There are restrictions on that too.
So as far as the first item on the checklist, we've heard essentially all ag. So we're starting with a base of what's on the table, we start taking stuff off the table. It sounds like.
Hang on, Chris.
Yes.
I kind of agree to keep farming sustainable. Sometimes a little extra is a helpful thing. And I firmly believe in ag pres. The one farm that's not on here, and we have very few of them left in the county, is the farm that hasn't had any off conveyances since whatever 62, that has all of its rights. It doesn't have a remainder property. I'm okay with what we're saying here, but we do know we've eliminated those farms, correct?
We have not taken those off the table.
Well,
They
Well, they would
current law,
have-
yes.
they would have to designate this area.
Right,
And
so
that's-
the question is, do we want to change it from remaining portions so that that property
Well,
also?
I don't know that we want to do that. I just want to make people aware.
Right.
I can think of two farms where I grew up that haven't had anything done to them since the 50s.
Right.
And I know the farmers that are on those farms, and someday to stay in farming, they might need a little extra income, which would be a rental. And we have taken that off the plate, not totally, because we can give an option. You can donate or you can preserve. So I just want our minds wide open on this.
Well, here's the rub.
There is a rub.
We also have to consider this. Would the commissioners then, let's just say you have no easement on your property. So you put this maximum amount of solar on your property. And we don't require, if it's not a remainder, so let's do all this qualification.
Yep.
Then when it comes up to the ag preservation program, now, do we then require that person to subdivide that portion off of the farm? Or we just say that's a saving and accepting from the deed, or even saving, accepting from the easement language itself, and it's already there?
Right.
So
there might be
you're not
solutions.
dealing with remainders here.
Right.
You're dealing with something now that has been put on that farm that may or may not meet the criteria of the ag preservation program. So do we should we be allowing to create a separate parcel from that or not? I mean, you're
Well,
starting to.
that is the solution, I think, is to
Well-
designate the area. It's a cost, it might be.
So the guy comes in, he said, I'm taking 2 off conveyances. So that actually has 4 lots usually, not 2, usually 4. And then, because each off conveyance, if you have 6.1 acres, you get 2 lots. So everybody does that. So now you got 4, the guy puts this 15 acres or 20 acres of solar on there. He comes into the ag preservation program, Now what?
I'm with you. It's a small amount of property owners that have this situation.
It's more than you think. It's more than you think.
Is it? Okay. And again,
I do this every day, Laura.
No, I'm just
My
not
home here.
following the logic, I guess, because you're saying if it has development rights, but then they do the solar, and they put the rest, if we go with the same thought process and the rest goes in easement, then
There's
I
farms,
didn't
there are
follow.
farms, there are farms in Carroll County that have taken off conveyances and then put their farms under easement. Now that lowers
Right.
the value of the easement
Okay, I'm
when
with
you
you,
sell
I'm
it,
with you this far.
okay?
Yeah.
Whether it's formula or assessment or
Yep.
appraisal, I mean.
Right.
So what I'm saying is, do we need to consider that? If you open this up to all ag, do we need to consider whether then the commissioners or the state, I mean, this would be a good question to ask the state, because a lot of these easements go through the county and to the state for reimbursement. Or rural legacy. Rural legacy should be more strict than the other easements. So then would rural legacy allow that farm to put under a conservation easement if they've already taken their solar and now they want to come back and put a conservation easement on it?
So it sounds
It's not a
like
remainder.
this is under the assumption that there is, that the section of our code currently that says that there will be an easement is now gone. So then that solar panel gone.
No, you're saying that it will only be an easement if it's a remainder.
Oh, no.
I'm talking about farms that have development rights left that may be eligible for the ag preservation program. So the landowner then is feasting in every trough that's there.
So could it do both? That's your question. Can you, if you open it up to everything, right? Can you go into an ag pres easement? If you do that first, then you certainly can't develop
Yeah,
solar.
we know that.
If you do the solar first, right?
And everything's an easement already.
Then the rest gets, if we go with the current code, the rest gets put in easement, then there's no others.
No, if we go with the current code, it'll only go under easement required if it's a remainder.
Right.
It's not required.
No, I mean, if we follow the same logic,
Okay,
that
fine,
if you
same logic.
develop solar, the rest goes under easement.
Regardless
And you
of-
have
Okay,
no, then you.
I'm catching up with you now.
Okay.
Remember my
Alright.
age here.
I was missing a few beats there, but I'm with you, right? So if you open it up to everything, and if you follow the same logic that the rest goes under an easement, then you
See,
couldn't, come
I'm
back.
saying,
to
what
it.
cork are we pulling out of the bottle that we
I
can't
understand.
put back in?
I understand.
Right.
And, yeah,
see, I envisioned it if I was that landowner and it was lucrative, I might subdivide
See, there's two
20
ways,
acres.
but Don, there are two ways to look at everything here. You can look at it in the broad spectrum of how it's going to affect Carroll County. So right now, we are on the green solar tear. We've been on other ones over the years. Some of them work, some of them don't. I hate the ones that don't. I love the ones that do, but we don't know that, okay? So what I'm saying here is, what are we giving up to get something, and is it worth it?
Right. That's actually why I said, maybe we just recognize it and forget I brought this up.
Because it.
No, I mean, be prepared to address that. Be prepared to address it, have a logical answer for the citizens.
And we're not out of bounds here, we're still on the subject. But what I'm saying is, if I didn't give a damn about, excuse my language, if I didn't give a damn about the future of Carroll County.
Right.
And I owned a farm and said, I bought that farm to glean everything off of it I can get, I'd jump on this remainder thing in a heartbeat.
See,
Put my solar on and do the remainder, I'd jump on it in a heartbeat. But if I wanted to make sure that Carroll County is a viable place to live, then I'm not out to get every little ounce of oomph off of my
Right.
farm that I can get. I'm there to make sure that the next generation has something to live for and by and to and give back to this
Well-
community, so it stays Carroll County and not Howard and Frederick.
And I share that. I'm definitely pro.
All right, I'll get off my
One state,
soapbox.
one thing stay agriculture. My concern is the alternative is develop the property. And
They have
then we hurt ourselves.
They have that right.
They have.
long as
And
they're-
then, well, we're not giving many in between, is what I'm.
But see, if they develop the property, it's required that they cluster that, which results in a remainder. The remainder then, under this current situation, the remainder then is subject to an easement if they want to put solar on it. So it's the best of all worlds for everybody in that respect, except for the guy's got the house across the road.
So can we go back to what you just brought to the table about remaining portions? Okay. So I think that's really important to address. Yeah, if you have remaining portion, it is going to have adjoining properties that probably have houses on them. They were the subdivisions from that greater lot. Right? That is true. We have plenty of other, like I'm working on a solar and industrial right now that has residential next to it, right? So I don't think that there's any case scenario in the code where there's anything prohibited based on proximity to residential. But how the code does address that for many uses is we have distance requirements. The contractor equipment storage yard that Jay mentioned, you can put that in ag, but it's a conditional use. You have to go to the BZA. You have to have a certain area that you are, restricted to, and there are distance requirements that have to be met from other properties. The code also uses setbacks to address residential properties. It uses our landscaping code to address what has to happen when you have that common property line there. So there are many different ways the code strives to create that differentiation, acknowledge that those are different uses, right?
Well,
So right, to put it on the table, right? Just because if we take remaining portions off, it doesn't mean that what we do select is not going to have residential
But we can
adjoining.
apply conditions.
I don't think we can just take ag remaining portions off. So we've started with
Right,
ag remaining
okay,
portions. We
if
opened
you
it to
broaden
all
it
ag.
to, right.
So now we'll talk about other things that may restrict it from all ag. But ag remaining portions are part of all ag, right? So right now, all agricultural properties are on the table. And we've got the supplement we gave you, which has all the various uses that can be put on there, which currently includes community solar just on the subset of ag remaining portions.
a couple of things. I think we're here because of that remaining portions. And I do think we can take it off. And we can open it up to all other ag. The only reason we're here is because Carroll County community had a problem with it being on ag remaining portions.
Okay.
It's not commercial and industrial. The people who live next to commercial industrial, maybe they knew it was commercial and industrial. We did not have that option at the time. We knew it was ag next door to us, and we knew all the other possibilities. We knew what was allowed. But at that time, community solar, was not there at the time. So I think we're back to, I think we need to take ag remaining portions off.
Okay.
Well, I would disagree because I know in my neighborhood knew that they were back to an ag remainder portion.
I'm still,
Hold on, Pat, hold on a second. We'll give you this.
I think we can still, as a next step, open it up to all agriculture and then decide on our eligibility process there.
Yeah.
But I don't think we need to include ag remaining in all. ag.
So what I would recommend, again, when we started this, what we said, the intent here is not, we would love that everybody come to a consensus.
I know.
What we're gonna do, but we probably won't get it.
But you were stating a fact that we can't, you said we can't exclude ag remainders. So you were
Yes.
making a decision.
Yes.
So I just had to put my 2 cents.
I appreciate that, yes, and you're absolutely right. So we'll include as an opinion that ag remaining portions should be excluded. And that'll be one of the opinions as far as what the group came up with. But Pat, you wanted to say something?
Well, aren't ag remainder portions part of ag? They're just simply a subset. So if you open it up to all ag remainder portions are still in there. Is that correct?
You're correct, but the recommendation by Cheryl is that she thinks that we should eliminate ag remaining portions. That's her recommendation. We'll document that as one of the recommendations for consideration.
Or a setback.
Yeah.
Okay. My other point though, however, is
Hold on, Pat is still
You
talking.
wouldn't care, but I'll
the
Hold on.
folks that back to my property knew when they bought their properties and built their houses that they were backing to an agricultural piece of property and that there could be things that could be built on it. Now, if they did not understand what that meant at the time, that is not the property owner's responsibility. And I think saying, you know, I like to look at the open farmland because it's lovely, it doesn't prevent me from putting things on there that are allowed in the agricultural zone.
But
And I
solar
think,
is part of that. if the
Church
plan
made out
is-
of solar.
yes, but other things, when I bought this piece of property as an ag remainder, there were other things that were principal permitted uses that are now conditional uses. So things go back and forth on that list. And when I bought the property, a church or a school was a permitted use, and now that's a conditional use. So there are things that are added and there are things that have been removed. But my point is, if you remove this, what else are you going to remove? Or what else are you going to allow me to use on this piece of property?
Well,
Yep.
maybe
Fair discussion.
removing isn't the right terminology. Maybe it needs to be eligibility. And if it's ag
Right.
remaining, it's not eligible.
Yes, yeah.
And based on what criteria are the main points that the adjoiners are, right? You're saying you would be okay with, I would have been okay with a contract equipment storage yard. I would have been okay with a church. I would have been okay with a wedding event center. I would have been okay with a
I'm
butcher
not
shop.
saying that, I'm just.
Right?
saying-
It's kind of awkward, right? No, you said I knew that those things could go there, right? But solar, you're saying no, and why is what I'm asking, and can it be addressed through, like you just mentioned, setbacks, or can it be addressed through something that's typically utilized in the code? So what are
I'm
the
saying
main
no,
primary
because
concerns?
it wasn't part of.
Just because it
at
wasn't
the
there
time.
when you bought your
Not just because, but
property.
because it was not, we didn't have the option to consider it, because
Sure.
it wasn't on there, right?
But as
at the
Kat
time.
said, the code went through another code change too, so.
But we're
things
here
change.
now, in this
Sure.
meeting, and this is being redone because of the ag remaining portions.
And
Correct.
Understood.
one thing you also have to remember, even though we're discussing changing things here now and eliminating solar, let's say from ag remaining portions, there's nothing to say that future commissioners cannot come back and change it again.
Sure.
So you got to remember that. Because we're eliminating it now, does not mean it's being eliminated forever.
And again, and for everybody's benefit, we're not going to come out of this going to the commissioners and saying,
This is
we
what we decided.
we decided that ag remaining portions should be out.
Right, I just
We'll
want to make
express
sure.
it that that was one of the opinions, and there are other opinions and so on. But it's, honestly, I mean, you can see the list that Brenda and I came up with as far as, we hadn't considered removing, like allowing all ag, but not allowing ag remaining portions. So I appreciate the opinion, and we'll add that to the list as something.
And I guess that is a question I have, you know, I'm here, is it just for my opinion? Is there any weight to it? I mean,
So ultimately, it's the commissioners, right?
ultimately, it's the
Yes.
commissioners, but you made a statement there before that we were going to keep ag remainders on there. And, you know, and I read the Carroll County Times article after, you know, this group was formed, and you said we will be taking opinions
Yes.
of the workforce members. Well, is it just an opinion, or is there weight to the reason that we're here? Because we're putting a lot of time and effort into it, a lot of research, and I want to make sure that our voices are heard.
Absolutely.
Not just ours, but everyone that we
That is the
represent.
purpose of this meeting is we will be documenting all of these opinions, and we'll be taking those to the commissioners, and then it's ultimately the commissioner's decision.
I
I
understand.
think
Yeah.
that was a miscommunication. I don't
Yeah.
think he actually meant we can't take that off.
No, 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 right.
It was just,
I
I
wasn't
was
even-
trying to understand what we were talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess one question would be, is it the remaining portion itself that's an issue? Or say there was a minimum, and I don't know if this is the right direction or not, I'm just thinking out loud, but like if there was a minimum property size of like 100 acres, and they could put it somewhere on the property that wasn't by residents, would it be okay then if it was a remaining portion? Or any of, you know what I mean? Like,
But
are there
that,
other,
that restricts the use. Excuse me, part of the reasons why the solar farm is put in the location it is on my particular property is the proximity to the connection point to the grid, to the three-phase power connection point. So I have 125 acres. I would love to put it in a different spot where neighbors wouldn't see it, and I wouldn't see it out of my home either, but it has to be in a certain location to meet that proximity requirement. So I think that's unreasonable to put in the zoning text amendment, because the whole purpose is to get solar in Carroll County, and you have to be able to do it where it works.
Yeah, and if do you mind if I kind of chime in here too? Sorry, everyone, for my late arrival, and I'm actually going to be leaving again in 15 minutes, but the next two meetings I'll be able to fully participate. My name is Charlie Coggeshall. I'm the Mid-Atlantic Director for Coalition for Community Solar Access. Laurel and Tyler were on before. Tyler's going to hop back on. I think Laurel's going to hop back on too when I have to jump. I apologize. I'm just coming off vacation and wasn't able to move my schedule around today. I agree with Pat, and I think that also kind of gets to the point that there's not going to be sort of an explosion of projects here because they're really hard to develop. You have to have the right interconnection point. You have to be close enough to that connection point for it to work. You have to have a landowner that's willing to do it, and you have to get through the permitting processes to ensure it happens too. But I think like it may be sort of a high level thought here to preserve that kind of rural agricultural interest for Carroll County would be to limit the amount of agricultural property in the county that can be used for community solar. I think right now that the state of Maryland has like a 3% of all farmland that can be used for renewables. Maybe Carroll County should have something like 2% of all agricultural land in Carroll County should be used or can be used for community solar. And that might be a way to at least have some comfort knowing that it's not going to turn into a wildfire of solar projects blooming across the county. It's always going to be limited to just single-digit percentage of the actual agricultural land opportunity that's in the county. So that's just an idea I wanted to throw out there and introduce myself as well. And again, I apologize for swinging in and out. I'll be consistently here in the next couple of meetings, but I am going to have to jump again in 10 minutes.
Thanks, Charlie. And that is something like we have on this page here to discuss is total solar facilities countywide. Do we want to put a cap on either percentage or a number of acres or total megawatts countywide? So that's something else that we can talk about.
Which is not at all in any of the regulations right now, correct?
No. And it
it's
doesn't
not
necessarily have to relate to where it goes in the ag either.
Yeah.
It
does not reflect a state mandate for Carroll County needs to have X number of acres in solar or X number of megawatts. Okay.
Yeah,
So it's a decision that we can make entirely to the county.
Yes.
That's great. I really disagree with Mr. Coggeshall about the increase. It is a booming industry. It is money, billions of money. When the money runs out, the energy solar use may decrease. But right now, it's on the upswing. And you must know that because of the number that have just been put in, either industrial or non-industrial, is jumping by leaps and bounds. So I think that right now is the time that we have to speak up and put those parameters in place. And that was one on my list that said, how many, is there a master plan for the amount of zoning regulations that have to impact on solar, and how do we work with that within the county? Thank God that's your job.
Well, right now, as it's written, right, part of the purpose of refining, going from ag, which is old brown, right, down to like, let's look at remaining portions. I think part of that was whittling that number down, right, as to what land might be utilized for this, whittling that acreage, right, as to what could be eligible. But then difference between, okay, eligible versus what's the other word used versus like you can actually utilize it.
So feasible, suitability.
Suitability. There it is. Right. So then is it suitable? Is it within, a certain distance of actually connecting to the grid, right? And that whittles it down even more. So I think that was a lot of the intent of the original code, was that it fine-tuned it, right?
What also was an incentive to add to the ag preservation acres, a huge incentive to do that. So my question is, if we open that up to all ag, does that go along with it? So if you allow 15, you know, but that's, I mean, I would be adamant against opening up to every ag parcel if there wasn't some codicil that says that, because, I mean, that was like, it was like, you know, the carrot and the stick here. The carrot was the solar, the stick was the land that would go into the ag preservation program to keep it ag, okay?
Right.
So if you put the carrot out there and then, and put the cream on the carrot and then not have the stick, now I mean, it's gonna, it's gonna, then the next question
Yeah, we
was,
have to put.
the next question was then,
What do we buy?
is that farm, well, sure.
What do we buy?
And we could narrow this down. If you would do that, open it up to all ag and say, all right, we put it on all ag, certain amount, you gotta put it under the ag easement program. You could make sure that that would only be under the Carroll County commissioner held easement program if the state would balk on that. You see,
We don't
there's
know
all
that.
kinds of.
So,
We don't know the answer to that question.
Well, we can get that answer. I mean, that's fairly simple, yes or no, really.
But I think you get the right thing. When we bought ag preservation, what do we pay for? What do we think we were getting? And to do away with it, like he's saying, it's the carrot and stick.
We were getting the opportunity for agriculture. It wasn't about families.
Right.
Listen, I heard every story in the book. I could write volumes on the stories. But we tried to somehow incorporate the family story, but think about the big picture. And mostly I thought about how we can do the best job of that farmer that's on there, but more so think about what the taxpayer's paying for. And that's so that the next farmer, the next family, person's not even related to me or anybody else, would have that opportunity to farm. That's the bottom line.
That's like,
That's why I say, if you open it up, you might as well kiss the ag preservation
that's what I'm saying.
program
too.
goodbye.
We're on the same page.
If you'd open it up to all ag,
Well, I think-
without the stick.
Right. I don't think we can open it up. That's
Well, I'm just throwing this out. I mean, you need
So,
to.
so current code is ag remaining portions.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner said, let's consider all ag. Cheryl has indicated, well, maybe all ag except for remaining portions. If you all are thinking it shouldn't be on all ag, basically we come down to the last bullet here, which is not allowed in the ag zone, which that's a perfectly acceptable opinion for any of you to have, is that, okay, maybe solar, community solar is not appropriate in the ag zone district at all. And we can document that as an opinion. So we're trying to ferret out all of the opinions and all the options. If we go down the route though of saying not allowed on any ag, then this becomes a very short discussion, right? So
Well, no, I
we have
think we
to
still need to
suspend-
have the other discussions, because if it does move forward, we
Exactly.
don't want to have not discussed what requirements should be in
Exactly.
place. if it did.
So we had to have to set aside the not allowed at all in ag and move forward with some of the other parameters and say, okay, if the commissioners say, yep, we're gonna allow community solar in ag, but what are the other kind of limitations that we want to put either on applicability, and then the next meeting we'll talk requirements.
Chris, we talk about remainders. We may think 20 acres, 25 acres, but they're larger than that. I know of one in particular that is some of the best ag ground in Carroll County. That's a 200-acre ag remainder. So a 10-acre, a 15-acre, or a 5-acre solar on that, I'm starting to get my mind changed here, but I might get back. But a 15-acre solar on that 200 acres would be a blessing to the county if we could put it under easement. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And believe me, every farm around that 200 acres is under easement and farmable ground, some of the best in the county. So we gotta figure out
Nobody said this was gonna be easy.
Right.
Yeah.
And if it's under easement, then anybody who's looking at that land, that's under easement. Like,
Yeah.
you might put up ag buildings, but, you know, you're not putting that contractor yard there,
Mhm.
right? So,
I mean, you can slobber over some of this good ground and some that's remainder portions.
Yeah.
So just like that lady there,
Yeah.
that 125 acres,
mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
could be just gracious land that
Absolutely.
should be under an easement.
Yeah.
In my
And-
opinion.
and
Yeah.
My
it can't be right now
Mhm.
because it's already taken, it's subdivision.
No, that's,
Right.
That's what
although
I'm getting.
remaining portions are eligible for ag preservation.
If they
Mhm.
still have lot rights.
No, not
Even if
necessarily.
they don't.
Even if they don't.
Oh, under the new development.
It's always
But it's not enough, but
They were-
Right,
it's
Or
not
just
enough
the
incentive,
board
Right,
decides your
They're
policy.
not gonna support.
Look,
Yeah.
it's not enough incentive to make it work.
Right, yes,
This-
Possible.
Thank you for clarifying.
This is incentive to make it work.
yes.
Yeah.
It's a carrot and a stick.
So can we turn?
Can I make a proposal?
Oh.
So
Sure.
many of the other solar properties are on much smaller pieces of ag remainders. There's one that I know of that's the ag remainder portion is 30 acres. Perhaps a way to limit this is that the ag remainder portion has to be bigger than some number. I would say 100, and you would say, well, yours is 125, but yeah, but also looking at the remainder that needs to be put in the ag preservation, perhaps that's a limiter too. Perhaps that other property you were talking about, sir, that's over 200 acres, perhaps asking them to put everything into an ag preservation is unreasonable. Perhaps they only put half of that in or some other number. So I think there's a lot of room for compromises here.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
And that's-
why, ma'am, that's why I asked the question in the very beginning. I rudely interrupted Brenda and asked whether there's some way of putting X amount of acres on 25 and X amount of acres on 200.
Right.
So that there's some equity.
Or the other way around, right?
You see what I mean?
Yes.
Because
So maybe,
if you have 26 acres and you put 25 of it under a solar panel and 1 acre under easement, what the heck does that do?
Yeah, right.
right, it doesn't do any good.
So Pat, are you suggesting then that maybe a minimum parcel size would make sense?
I think it could make sense. And I think maybe the remainder that goes into the easement should only be half or 25% of the remaining portion. It doesn't have to be all of it. And that would encourage those people with larger remainders to participate.
Okay.
Why don't we take the other side of the coin and start from where should solar be?
Mhm.
It's an industrial industry. It should be on industrial land or commercial land. So that gives you another perspective
Right.
of starting.
Yeah,
So can you say that it would be preferred? Or can you just say it needs to start by looking at what's left in industrial areas or commercial areas and stay away from the ag as only under certain criteria and restriction?
yeah, and that's where we are, right, is
I mean, it's the
the
same.
industrial and commercial, it's absolutely permitted. And if it's financially viable, then solar companies are going to be gobbling up commercial and industrial.
But it's
property.
not for that because that's
Right.
not where they make the
Exactly.
big bucks.
Because agriculture's making it too cheap.
Well, that land is very valuable as is industrial land. And, you know, that's how capitalism works. Some things are worth more than others. And it's more expensive to own a piece of industrial property. And it doesn't make sense for a solar company to pursue that avenue. Now, if someone builds their own industrial building there and puts their own solar panels there for their own use, that's great. And you've seen that around the county. But to require solar only on industrial property, the math doesn't work. And I'm sorry, that's just the way it is.
And it also gets at the point that Pat had made previously, which is that there's also a landowner kind of right opportunity potentially for diversity in their portfolio of how they're using their land. So I think just a complete block on any use of ag land, to me, is a kind of disservice to the Carroll County residents that want to be able to use their land to make money in different ways. But I think having limits so that it doesn't just blossom out of control, whether it's on the total percentage of ag land and or maybe on, maybe there's a minimum parcel size, maybe there's a percentage requirement or ratio requirement with the easement element, then that's compromise. That's a way to give landowners an opportunity to do what they want with their land while also maintaining kind of some of the core competency, core interests and values for the county.
So just to explore the idea a little bit more so we can move on then. So a minimum acre size for a remaining portion or any ag property. So if you assume 20 acres, if we keep that limit as to maximum size of a community solar facility, right?
Yes.
What would be the minimum sort of additional conservation land that you would want to see? So I could throw out 25 acres. So you got 20 plus 25, you're at 45. 50 is a nice round number.
Yeah.
So it's a 50-acre parcel, the minimum size that we might want to consider to allow community solar on.
I know where Joe thinks. I can agree with where you're thinking it, but I think we might want to go backwards if you look at the chart and you have underneath there productive soils.
Oh, we'll get there.
Wow, because I say this because some residual property is on great land. And some residual property is on something you wouldn't farm in the first place.
Yep.
So maybe we're struggling too much with the first part and saying, where can it go?
Yeah.
Production soils and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we preserve our farm land and it just by default, it tells you what kind of property it's going to be.
Well, what about if we start with looking at the assumption that we're looking at all the ag zone, just for discussion, that we're looking at all the ag zone and then go through these other pieces that would then limit it back down, and then that maybe help us focus back to where an ag zone. We just, come back to that, what you're saying. Those things might help us focus that discussion.
Yeah, well, all I'm saying, when you try to choose an acreage, tell me which acres you're choosing.
Yeah. And there may be other factors, yeah.
If you talk about the parcel size, I'd sure like to get more than I give up. So, if you have, I go back to that 25-acre thing. If you can put it, if the majority of it is solar, what the hell is good the other part?
Yeah.
It doesn't require that to be put under easement. A 1 acre easement is a Johnson grass patch.
Right. Yeah.
I hate Johnson grass.
That's in the meeting minutes.
You put that in the ordinance. Like it already is.
Can I go big picture for a minute, which also, but this was put in as a principal permitted use, which you went over at the beginning, the BZA, what they do, what the planning commission does. And I'm curious as to when I started thinking about the public, what the public was saying about these, right? What everybody at these meetings was saying. I did draw some parallels to, and I know there are some parallels to cell towers, because when we would get a cell tower project in, oh boy, right, we would hear from people. And there's no project that is immune from public comment, just so you know. Like the thing that you think, well, no, I don't comment on that. Like we get an outcry of comments, right? So there's not a particular type of project that is, but so cell towers. And then I started thinking about like cell towers, like where they're kind of self-regulating in terms of where they can be placed, right? You're not going to place two of them like right on top of each other. But they do go through a BZA process to get an approval to be put onto an ag piece of property, right? And it needs, obviously you can see them from it. They're like, we're talking 200 to 300 feet tall, right? So like everybody's seeing these, they're very visible. But when I started looking at the BZA, and I will say I used to sit on a BZA, not our BZA, but a different BZA, and I knew that there were criteria, right? And what the BZA is looking at when they look at, can you put that use on that particular property, right? You have to come in and you have to say, I want to put it right there. Here's how it's going to go. Here's where it's going to go. And the criteria outlined in the code are really specific, and they are listening to the neighborhood and considering all the testimony from the neighborhood. They're looking at, not for solar, but, traffic conditions, the effect of this on the environment. Does it create sounds and odors and gases and smoke and fumes, right? They are really looking out for the specific area that the request is being considered for. And is that suitable on that property? Which leads me back to, I know that there were reasons why it was put in as a principal permitted use, but having that extra layer of the BZA, their guidelines and their considerations, their criteria for these solar projects, and it takes it to another public meeting. It seems like it's something that should be considered as well. Maybe that starts to be a place where they put conditions and they address to a greater extent than the planning commission is permitted in some cases, but that the BZA might be a good place.
11 different conditions that they have to look at
Yes.
when they hear an application.
Yeah.
In the code, and they're very specific. Orderly growth of the community, traffic conditions, facilities, the effect of the proposed use upon the peaceful enjoyment of people in their homes, conservation of property values, effect of odors and dust. Is it the most appropriate use of the land and structures, public convenience and necessity, type and kind of structures in the vicinity where public gatherings may be held, compatibility and the purpose of the chapter. So they're very specific things that they have to take into consideration when looking at a case.
But they are still constrained by Schultz v. Pritz.
Yes.
And that's where I think, there's a court case, I don't want to misquote, they have a very specific criteria on which to
Basically, if
Evaluate.
what the Schultz case is, was actually a case that's here in Carroll County. Does this use cause more of effect on surrounding properties at this one particular location than it would at any other property with the same zoning classification? So would that putting that use at that property, would it cause more issues for the community at that location if it would down the street a couple hundred blocks?
So they have to find something very unique about that property, and that oftentimes is why they say, well, put conditions on it, but they don't deny it. I've heard them say, they don't deny
But
it.
they can.
They seldom deny it because of that, but they can put extra.
And
But I
there's a
just didn't want
public
to
meeting as
build
well.
up the conditional use as too much of a.
That's a stop all.
That's why it's not an maybe.
Basically.
Right.
It's an approved use that can be on the property. But is that use, if it's on that property, going to cause more issues at that location than it is on another property somewhere else?
And how's that
And who
That's
determines that?
That's what the board determines.
Board
Board
of
Appeals.
The board
So you
attorney-
say this is not acceptable here where you want to put it,
Right,
but you
basically,
can put it over there where you don't want to put it,
possibly, yes.
you know?
Yeah, they'll say, is it going to cause more issues at this location next to all these houses? Is it going to cause more issues there than it would, let's say, on the other side of the farm? They can look at it that way.
But it's a pretty big burden.
It's a tough burden. I mean, it really is tough because, like I say, it's very solid in the court cases that that's the standard you have to use. So that's why I would say it's not
May not be the answer.
the answer, but it's something that they can look at and say, is this location the appropriate location for that use?
The problem with.
I'm sorry, what did you call it, the Schultz?
Schultz?
Schultz v. Pritz.
Schultz what? Fritz?
V. Pritz.
V. Fritz. Oh, versus Fritz. Yeah,
Versus
okay.
Pritz, yes. And that
Well,
was
the problem
actually,
with solar is that it's so restricted as to where the developers need
well, that's
and
something that
want
the
and
developer,
desire to put it, which is
Because of
always,
that 3 phases.
well, you know, if you can't find the line close, it's just gonna cost you more money.
that's true.
to get
Then it may
to
not
that.
be viable for them to
And
do
the
it.
property owner never wants it right by their house. They want it at the end of their property.
Right.
Well, I don't blame them for that if I was gonna be doing solar, but trust me, I never would. because it affects the land. And that's where the bigger issue is with a lot of the people in Carroll County. And it's the suitability too. You know, it's not suitable to be staring at this solar facility day and night. So maybe that's where the conditions and the restrictions come.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't necessarily hear anybody suggest that a minimum parcel size was something that we wanted to throw it as an opinion. I mean,
Parcel size for the remainder portion,
Yes.
is that what you're
or
saying?
no, for any ag.
If we start with like, or we're starting, the all ag zone is open, how are we whittling that down to where it should be? And it's
I
one of
like
those
your
things,
idea.
the minimum.
Let's look at the other,
Yeah, let's look at some of those.
setbacks
We can come back to
and
it.
soil
Right.
classifications and things like that. Setbacks will be something, you know, that would determine the size.
Right.
So how about we
Or the
move,
kind of soils.
how about we move on and talk about productive soils for a minute? Because this is something that has been brought up and I think other counties look at it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen because this may be helpful in the discussion. So what I will do is I'm going to turn on. So what the green colored that you see, this is the soil classification, what's called the capability class. And Ralph, you could probably explain this much better than I can, but what I've done is I've color coded it. So the 3 green colors are 1, 2, and 3, class 1, 2, and 3 soils, which are the higher productive soils. Right? As you get further down. And what I can do is I've bookmarked the various projects. This is the Willett Farm, which is one of the proposed. You can see that basically their whole farm here is all in the green type color.
Which is the bright green is class
Right,
1.
class 1.
Class 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Let me go to
Class 1 being most productive.
most productive. Yep. So here's the Chaberton. So you can see the, again, all productive.
Is this available somewhere?
Yeah.
Soil Conservation Service has it.
Yeah, Soil Conservation has the.
I
soil
Googled it this morning, couldn't find it.
And our sales.
So here's Nora Valley. And see here, you can see over against the reservoir, you've got less productive soils, but these here are still.
1 and 2?
1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3.
Let's go to, let's see, 4,000 Brown.
Can I ask a quick question from the phone?
Yes, you had a question?
Oh, yes, sorry. When were these soil classification maps done last, I guess? My first question.
They're updated in so many years. Some of them are older than others, but I used to know how many, but some of them are fairly recent and some of them are not. But they're pretty accurate.
So
they're pretty accurate. Because if they would change a lot, it would be because somebody made a mistake to begin with, but the other thing that could change it would be erosion, rampant erosion, or some moving of the soil on the property, which none of these probably are subject to that. So they're fairly accurate.
Yeah. And the NRCS data was, I got a new data set up less than a decade ago.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, so it's within the past 10 years. Yeah. Which one is this? I forget. This is it 4,000 Brown? Yeah, this is 4,000 Brown. Go to
So
Pleasant.
that's wet, that's the wetlands. Yeah.
Yep, so there's Pleasant Valley, Spring Valley.
Spring Valley's where?
Abby Dorsey.
Yeah.
Oh,
Across
Yeah.
the street.
Yeah.
I mean,
Ring a bell.
funny you should ask. And I mean, that's Piney Run right
Yeah,
back there.
okay.
And,
And here's Schaefer.
that, really, that is such a beautiful piece of property. Where's that one?
That's me, off
Sullivan.
of Sullivan Road.
Oh,
That's
no,
right.
Sullivan
Yeah,
Road.
yeah, yeah.
It's,
That's my house right
but
there.
it's so open.
And then the Willets.
Is it, can I jump in with one more question, if you don't mind?
Sorry.
Sorry, if it's okay, I'd like to ask one more question. I guess, like, is there anything in the Carroll County Code to prevent farmers from selling this land to a residential development, depending on soil classification?
No, there's no restriction from the soil classification perspective on development.
Okay. I guess that's our ultimate perspective, and I know I'm not Charlie, so I'm kind of speaking out of turn here, but we consider this to be like a short-term use of that soil that ultimately will allow that farmer to keep farming and then put that land back into production once the panels are removed. Whereas if they if they needed the money and sold that land to a residential development, it's never going back to farming. So that's, I guess, my challenge when people start talking about soil classifications. I look at it as a dichotomy between, a housing development going there or a 20-year thing that puts pylons in the ground and then is removed at the end of that time. So I guess that's just my perspective for what it's worth in the meeting, I guess.
So the point of why I wanted to bring this up is I can zoom out and we can look around the county, but and we can look at any area that you'd like. But the point is that we have very productive soils here in Carroll County in general, right? There's very little yellow and orange and so on that you're seeing. And if I pan around to different parts of the county, we're up in Tonytown here. It's predominantly green. And so putting in some sort of criteria related to the quality of the soil I don't think there's any juice in that lemon, right?
I would think
I would
class
think there
three,
is.
class three is not going to produce anywhere near.
Right, it's borderline.
My whole farm's class 3.
Put the solar panels up, right? Big money in it.
We also have to consider that the remainder of the properties are going to go into agricultural preserve. So in my case, that 110 acres is in preserve and we're going to continue to farm that land.
Yeah. I mean, certainly we're throwing this out on the table for discussion. I wanted to point to the way we determine the suitability of the soils is from this mapping, right? And so here's the mapping. We can look at any property you'd like to and so on. I'm just showing in general, as you look around the county, there's a reason why we're Carroll County and we have the ag production that we do, right? It's because we have good soils.
What percentage is 1 and 2 versus 3?
Well, the 1 is the least part. You really have to have good topsoil to get 1. But there are 1 soils. Most of it's 2 and a little bit below 2, but most of it's class 2, which is very, very good soil. And class 3 can produce, under the new technology, class 3 can produce really good crops.
Yeah.
And
And the other thing that I would throw out
certain
there,
type of crops.
the other thing I would throw out is this is something that we looked at when we went through this the first time around, right? And we looked at properties and there would be class 3 soil and that's where the farmer was farming. And there'd be class 1 and 2 soils and they weren't farming that. Go figure.
Well,
Right.
no, that's
That's why we didn't.
that class 1 soil could be right along the stream where all the silt is. So the erosion over the decades and decades and decades and hundreds of years, where does that go? Along the stream. So you might have topsoil like that along the stream, but you can't farm it.
Right. Yep.
So that's what you're seeing, Chris.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah. I'm just saying that that is something that we looked at as to whether it was a criteria we
Yeah.
wanted to put into the current.
Every story has something behind it,
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
So, I mean, certainly open to, if we want to throw that out as an opinion to consider, but.
I think it's a disservice to our farmers to say, we're gonna take those good class 1 and class 2. And of course, solar cannot be done near water anyway, so that takes out the large part of that. I don't know, is it loam that you like or something? Anyway, I don't know. But I think it's a grave disservice to say we're gonna ruin those highly productive soils. And if we're gonna put 3 in the mix, I can see that, that's up to the farmers to decide. But I think it's a disservice to allow solar to go in those prime agricultural areas.
However, the one thing we have to, just in general, as we're talking about these things, we don't want to create requirements that basically, in effect, make it impossible, right? Because then why bother having the requirements? And we'll just say that we're not doing it, right? If we were to restrict from no 1, 2, or 3 soils, there'd be no solar in Old County, right?
I guess that's why I asked.
And there'd be no houses either.
What percentage are 2 versus 3, because
Mhm.
maybe that's where we draw the line.
Yeah.
Maybe 1 and
Or
2 are not allowed in 3.
Yeah. I mean,
We're looking at each property and the location of the facility itself, because if you have a property that's largely 2 soil and you put the facility in the 2 soil, but they could have put it in 3 soil, perhaps that could have, when you look at the property itself, and that could be a criteria versus an applicability.
I like that approach.
I'd rather base it on slope.
Yeah.
Well, there's slope.
It's non-farmable land.
You can put solar on any
Okay.
kind of slope.
I mean, you know what I'm saying, in other words, that 200 acre
Well-
remainder I was talking about,
Yeah, South Carolina.
there's probably some unsuitable areas on that
That's
200 acres.
a different thing. That's something.
So,
Yeah.
you can make it, put that thick of restrictions and still not get on that.
Right, right. So we'll talk, we can talk about slope in a minute. That's didn't have that on the list. We can add it to the list. Here's an example. This is the one out at Sullivan Road.
Schaefer property.
The shape, yeah. So there you can see class 1,
That's good
most of
dirt.
class 2.
That's as good a dirt as you'll find in Carroll County.
Mhm.
That's like pristine soil.
And then there's another farm right adjacent to it too.
And what's interesting is they have solar.
They do.
They do.
Yeah, they do.
That's landscape.
Yeah.
That's mulch.
Yeah.
Wasn't that a transfer type solar deal to create for a business in Westminster? Wasn't that solar directed for that? Balance?
Yeah.
Yeah, that isn't the Falmouth, though. This is Clark. in
But
front
it
of it.
was.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was the
When the
Schaefer.
solar was put in, it was.
And that's what, that's,
So that's,
existing solar is on class 3, is that the color?
Yes, it's
Well,
class
that's
3.
correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
But that's
I will-
moving, that's Cranberry Creek
And
right
I
there.
will, yeah, and I will say that on that parcel, where they put solar is the best place to put solar.
Mhm.
As far as,
Yeah.
Right.
as what you would not be, that's not really good farmable land there.
Mhm.
Right.
It's like, I mean, it's really slow.
Okay.
So I'll give them credit for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we've heard is a lot of farmers, they know their land better than anyone, and they know where there's not going to be a productive area, and that's typically where they site the solar. I mean, ultimately, I think it comes down to landowner rights. I mean, unless you tell, farmers that they can't do, things to their land, other land based on soil classification, it seems a little strange that you would put that on solar, because they don't have to farm that land. They could leave it fallow, or, just because you're taking it out of service for solar doesn't mean it's going to necessarily produce crops, right?
Well, that's where that larger facility is there. That's a use on ag land, but it's not ag.
Right.
It's not used for ag.
Right.
This year.
So that's now that's really good land
Mhm.
where that is located,
Yeah.
but that's not an ag
What is it?
use.
What is that for?
Contract, well, it was for mulch.
Mulch, it's mulch.
Yeah.
Mulch.
Yeah, right
Yeah.
at the bottom of the mountain.
It's a lot of service.
Used to be chickens. That was Lindsay Schaefer's.
Yeah, well, the chicken houses are over here.
Down with Handens, yeah.
That's all on the class 3.
This is 2.
No, that would be 2.
That's not.
Oh, I'm looking at the
That-
building.
that's
Building here,
Yeah, that's
that's-
just the curtilage of the building and.
See, that's balanced,
It's
and the front is
paved,
Clark's.
running trucks and all. It's stoned. That's what makes it light colored.
Okay, maybe you can see it better that way.
There you go.
There you go.
So you can see that's on very, very productive land
Mhm.
where that complex is.
Mhm.
But down here, as you see, it runs off to, where's the stream, Chris?
Right,
There's a
there's
stream down
trees.
there.
Trees are
Trees.
That's the beginning of Cranberry.
There's the stream here.
That's where the Westminster Waters
Mhm.
source starts from.
Mhm.
Runs right through the middle of Westminster.
So any opinion, so we can keep moving on, productive soils, that's a pretty easy one. Any opinions on that we would like to restrict to certain soil types?
I mean, I don't think that it should be on productive soil, so grass 1 and 2. That's my
Okay.
opinion.
That's my
Okay.
opinion too.
So,
And I think you have to take into consideration, is the farmer actively farming it because it's very productive land? They're not gonna waste their time and energy on anything that's below a 3, or, I mean, it would cost them too much to
So-
bring it up to a 2 or a 1.
so looking at use is very difficult, right? Because that can change year to year.
That's right.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, but the mapping, this mapping is something that's very definable and we can build rules around. So if your suggestion is not on productive soil, so 1 and class 1 and 2, is there a percentage? Like, so for example, this property has 1, 2, and 3 here. Would this property be allowed, in the perfect world of we come up with a code that follows this rule, would this property be allowed to have community solar?
No.
Okay.
I don't think that's an appropriate approach.
Well,
If this property were to be sold and houses were to be built, you wouldn't restrict the building of houses based on the soil type. You don't prevent other types of uses based on soil type. You're really interfering with the property owner's rights and the rights of using their land as they see fit. So I don't think this is an appropriate measure to determine where solar should go.
Yeah.
Well, how's the
Understood,
camp-
and so, I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, understood, and so that's the spectrum of the opinions, right? Is no, it shouldn't be used, and yes, 1 and 2 should be limited. And so we'll document those as the 2 extents of the opinions, and then it's gonna be up to the commissioners to decide which way they wanna go. And we're agnostic to it. We don't, it doesn't matter to us which way it goes. So we're just trying to.
She's saying houses, but there's no other use in the entire code that limits where we can put it per soil classification. Now, you're almost equating it to like if we have a stream and we require an easement over a certain area, right? You're almost leaning towards like, should there be like soil easement areas established on every soil classification of 1 and 2 in the county, right? That you have certain restrictions that now pertain to all, but like you said, when you zoom out, it's like, it's all of Carroll County.
So would you said on this property, not at all, but what if they proposed community solar only on the class 3 portion? Would that be okay?
I don't know how big that property is.
I live there.
Yeah.
I'm looking right at the farm.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to see a pink house with purple dots on it.
Right.
I wouldn't want to see solar panels, but I do agree with property rights.
Yeah.
I do want to see agriculture.
Mhm.
I don't want farmers to have to compete against stuff that's subsidized, such as solar panels.
Yep, got it.
That being said, if, you're not gonna be able to put it on that class 3 there, because the way the slope is,
Mhm.
it won't get the array of the sun the right way.
Right.
But if they could do it there, I don't know what I could say why they shouldn't.
Okay, that's fair.
That's not real, that little piece right there is tough, the farm right there, so
Yeah.
go for it.
Okay.
You're just saying based on
The topography.
the classification of that portion, would it be acceptable?
Yeah, on that portion, yeah, if they,
Yeah.
if they could fit on that.
Now, just one other thought on that. Everything around that property, I think I'm correct here. Every property around that property is under an ag preservation easement.
You are right.
Okay.
Every property.
Mhm.
So we're talking 600 acres, 800 acres.
And then the South Woods, the whole area,
So,
large as
we're- so the criteria for that program, what I'm getting at, the criteria for that program is very specific also. And the idea was to preserve as much of that land as possible in that valley.
See, the owner of that built the house that's going to be the ship's quarters. So that is basically, it's residual property already.
So
Yeah.
50.
Big development.
That's Gary Clark built, yeah.
But isn't he now deceased?
That was started even before the program.
As old as I am.
Ship's quarters was started before the ag preservation program.
Right.
That's one of the one of the reasons why it was initiated for that reason.
Okay, so it sounds like we've got kind of the two ends of the spectrum. One is that, no, let's not take soils into consideration. The other being, let's not allow them on class 1 and 2, but any other would be acceptable. Is that reasonable?
I think it depends on certain criteria or restrictions. You know, criteria is if it's something that cannot be farmed, then certainly. But if it's an area that's up for question, does the landowner then can step in and say, no? You know, of course, the landowner is the one that asks for the solar or says, no, I don't want solar.
Yeah.
But he could say, no, don't put solar here, but you can put solar there.
Chris, I'd be curious to know what the criteria was that allowed them to put that much solar on that property, because as you see, I don't think it was ever put on there to run those chicken houses, was it?
Based on the square footage and the roofs of all the property.
Oh, it's on roofs, so it's not ground.
No, it's ground mounted.
Oh, it is.
Like the square footage for solar panels as an accessory use in ag zoning is based on the total of all the roofs on the property. It can be either on the roof
Okay.
or it could be on the ground, either way. Or you could split it, have half on the ground and half on the roof.
So they
That's
took,
that's almost 40
Based
acres
on
in
the
the
roof.
room.
so they
The area could be more than square footage.
so they took consideration of the vacant chicken.
Yes.
It's a roof.
And put it
No,
on.
I don't know how they do that, 'cause that's a different owner. The chicken house is not owned by Clark. That's Bauman.
Yeah, well.
That's Bauman versus Clark.
Oh,
So I don't know how they do that.
You explained that.
Yeah, and that goes for any farm in the county. If they want to do it for their farm
Oh,
as an
yeah.
accessory use,
Right.
it's based on their total square footage of all the roofs.
But on an ag preservation property, it's based on the usage of that property. So if you have a dairy operation, you might need more solar panels that would be allowed on that than if you just had a farm that you wanted to just put lights on your, right?
Now, it's based totally on the square footage, whether it's a dairy farm or the buildings are empty. It's based on that square footage.
Even under easement?
We don't take easements into account on ag buildings.
So you could put solar on the,
If you have a
the agricultural, building that's the big ag building that's down there and.
Yeah, I know you can do that.
County
I know you
property.
can do that.
Look at something.
the easements that are on the property don't
It's a lot of
count.
roofs.
It's just based on total square footage of the roofs.
Now, if an agreement does not allow for a certain use, if the specific agreement says you can't have it, then that's the
But
agreement.
under the easement, the
That's
location,
prior.
but under the easement, the location of those solar panels would be a consideration.
But that's not a consideration we take into account.
Yeah, so that would be an ag board consideration, not a zoning consideration. Yeah. So we're coming down to the end of it, but I was going to suggest, if I could, that we talk about proximity to other zoning districts, because that's another one, since I've got the map up, would be easy to look at. So again, zoning is defined by the commissioners, through the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the commissioners adopt zoning and so on. And then use is different than zoning. There are multiple uses then that are allowed by the zoning code within zoning districts. So the cheat sheet that we gave you at the end, that lists all of the uses that are allowed in the zoning district. So they include everything from like a winery with a farm alcohol producer to a butcher shop, to a slaughterhouse, to a bed and breakfast, veterinary facility, golf course, commercial stable, daycare center, private school, and so on. So all of those are allowed in the zoning district.
A lot of C's in there, though. C is conditional.
Conditional, yes, exactly.
A lot of conditions. We need to put a lot of conditions on.
So what I wanted to,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. So it's a yes, yes with conditions.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Now, there are a couple, and I think, let me look. No, that's Nora Valley. Maybe. Yes, here we go. So here's the Chaverton site. So here you can see this yellow, that indicates that it's zoned residential. And then this green is zoned agricultural. So.
Brown, right?
Yeah.
You gotta change your ag to brown, Chris. Nobody uses green for ag.
It's lush. It's
But now it's universal. Green.
You really want me to change it?
No, don't change it.
School.
Yeah, what do you make conservation?
It's different green.
Oh, this is a green thing right here.
Hold on. Hold
Oh,
on.
yeah.
Give me a second.
We changed the green.
I'm looking for a brown. I don't see a brown. That's it.
No, the one up
Quite
here.
good, right next to that.
Right there?
Yeah, I'm
That one.
That one?
Yeah.
Because that would have been too dark.
There you are.
There. I can
That's
have
better.
It looks like
Okay.
desert.
Are you okay with yellow for residential?
Yeah.
And and can green be conservation? Okay. So just as an example, again, to differentiate zoning from use. So this was probably the original subdivision for the property that created the remaining portion. So this is a residential use, but it's zoned agricultural, whereas across the street is zoned residential. So the question that we've got for you is, would you recommend any sort of requirements based on zoning, like proximity to zoning for agricultural land that is used for community solar?
Yeah,
Why?
like 2,000 feet,
Well,
3,000.
That's what I would have to
Are we
watch.
talking setback now?
Should we use zoning or use?
And use is very difficult because.
I know, I would go with,
Change
yes,
it.
I would go with zoning,
Yes,
but what would be the argument?
I'm not suggesting that.
Yeah.
That's all for discussion.
Are you asking for those zoning district, or are you asking for setbacks from?
No, we're not talking setbacks.
Okay,
Yeah.
It's just a condition that comes up.
Yep, so
So
again,
as you pointed out,
Mhm.
residential is on ag, so
yes,
we really can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and in this case, you do have residential zoning that's adjacent to it. So.
If you base it on zoning, you're still,
It's the
but that you
use.
still have other residences there.
It's the use,
But you
yeah.
base it on residential.
But I can pull up other examples if you like. Go back to the Schaefer, that's all ag.
That's all that.
But some of those ag parcels have residential uses. You live
Yes.
right there,
Yeah.
like you said, so it's still a residential use.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
what.
the
So
will.
I don't think it's
But use
possible for ag.
change.
Yeah,
Use can
right.
change.
It's the
Use can
use.
change.
It's the use.
Use can change, yeah, but
So what happens if it's vacant today and then somebody buys it and builds a house on it?
Mhm.
And, yeah.
Yeah, here's Nora Valley, that's
Solar
that's
panels
all.
off that station and then added to and built somebody else's house. They get their approval for the house.
I heard it. I saw your eyes, but that's loading. What's it? One house first.
They don't tell them that. They want to sell that property.
Oh, I know.
I think that's a couple
Isn't this
of
just
matches.
What more people think?
So
It is, but I can't imagine how many phone calls you get.
Yeah.
Wait, say that.
Feel bad for them.
They just believe that this is.
So-
That's their board.
So look,
Yeah.
let's,
What's orange?
industrial. This is-
Industrial?
That's global warming, global warming.
Sorry, I didn't. This is pitch colors.
Well, there's a lot of.
These are the weeds now.
I-
These are good topics.
I'm an engineer, I'm not a planner.
Where is this, Chris?
Yeah, but it's all that industrial.
Yeah, that's all industrial, so industrial.
I'll be honest, I'm having a little
No
trouble
way.
answering
No,
some of your
that's gotta be
questions.
something else.
Because I'm not
Italian
sure
Pleasant
what
Valley?
the push of the citizens has been on these projects.
Zoning, I won.
It's been like yin versus yang.
I won, that's all.
I don't want to see them. That is issue. I'm agriculture. I'm like keeping agriculture very vibrant.
That's
Way
right,
off
that's
in
what
the
it is.
future.
That's
But
what
it
it
is, this is the Little Brown County, I'm okay with that too.
Pretty far outside.
We buy a barn, so.
So it sounded, so overhearing some of the conversations that we're talking about, it sounded like with going by zoning is not some restriction that we want to put on where it's going
I think it'd be difficult to manage.
to. Okay,
But as, I'm sorry, Kirsten said that use can change. So that is something to consider, but I think use at the present time.
yeah. So my recommendation would be from a use perspective that we look at setbacks and things like that, not a use or zoning.
Okay.
So part of the criteria that we'll look at versus the applicability.
Exactly, yep.
I definitely think that's.
Okay. All right.
Wow.
We're moving, we've got momentum. Next was proximity to environmental features. So this is, we don't have any suggestions here. We put it on the list because it sounded like
Was brought up.
something. Yeah, it was brought up.
Well, we already do have some environmental features that can't be in floodplains, it can't be in wetlands,
Yep.
it can't be in, removed forest or anything yet.
Yep.
So we already have some environmental
Yeah.
restrictions.
And
current.
all of our environmental codes would be reviewed during the site plan process and would apply to this.
Yes.
So they would be protected through those, what the code requirements that we have.
I thought, is there an environmental feature that I'm not thinking of that's not, like I know forest, you can't cut trees.
Yep.
But is there something I'm not thinking about here?
Okay.
You
That's why
know,
we didn't have a suggestion.
one thing that concerned me when looking at the Nora Valley plans, which directly affects me, is that they noted how far away the Aldersburg water supply was, but did not note how close Liberty Reservoir is, which also supplies water to the county and to Baltimore County and the city. But they only noted the Aldersburg water supply. So, I mean, is that something that's closely looked at? Going through the process, would that have been, and I actually brought some people out to see that this field runs into a culvert that feeds a stream, that feeds the reservoir. These are all effects that will happen as a result of, potential runoff and not knowing what is in the solar panels.
The stormwater management
Toxic.
requirements would have to be met. So there is that. And then the reservoirs themselves all have a 1,000-foot setback.
What kind of?
Well, it's the watershed. It's not in my area because, we're already affected by runoff from that field. We've never, we've just let it go. But our horse pasture is eroded from that field as it is now. where they're proposing the solar. So I did have
So I think we should-
Jonathan Bowman and Heather and Marie came out and looked at everything, you know, Heather and I walked all the way back to that stream. But, you know, I don't know like what other process it would go through other than for them to look at it, like who is determining how that's going to affect Liberty Reservoir?
So, I guess two things. One is that setting some sort of criteria related to a watershed to a reservoir would be a severe restriction in Carroll County because more than half the county is in a watershed for a reservoir. Like the entire east side of the county all drains to either Liberty, Lock Raven, or Pretty Boy. So that kind of restriction would be a major restriction on the county. So it's neither here nor there. I just wanted to point that out, right? As if we wanted to consider being within a reservoir watershed being an issue, that would have major implications. The other thing is the question is what is, I'm not sure what the concern is from a water quality perspective. Certainly from a stormwater perspective, where you've got increased runoff and erosion then of nutrients and sediment and so on, those will all be taken care of from stormwater management. So that's what any development, whether it's solar or any other sort of development, has to meet stormwater management requirements. That's state and local requirements. But I'm not sure what other types of water quality concerns there are.
The toxic materials. And we know that some panels are made of toxic materials. I mean, you'll hear from the solar industry that they're not, but I think that there should be a requirement, and I know we're not there yet, and this may be a few meetings in, but we should require material data sheets from all of these manufacturers so we can see exactly what's in these solar panels. And we did have a water specialist speak at the public hearing, and that was something that Commissioner Bigliotti noted. So we don't want to have the PFAS or forever, chemicals in our water. We want to make sure that's not happening. So that's part of the concern.
Sure. Yeah, understood. Yeah, and but that's more of a universal concern, not necessarily a proximity to a stream or a reservoir or anything like that. So from an applicability perspective as to where a solar facility could be constructed, I personally don't see an environmental limitation other than what we've already talked about. And it's already
because you're saying they all are in close proximity to watersheds.
Yes.
And those any requirements would be on all of them, not just within proximity.
Yes.
Carroll County is his brother's best friend because Washington DC would be out of water if it wouldn't be for the water. I mean, that's really right.
Yeah.
So we really do take care of our neighbors.
Yes, absolutely.
That's another impetus of the Ag Preservation Program. The more land you have open, the better neighbor you are to everybody else.
And aren't there like certain levels of streams that you have to protect?
Yes.
And is that something we should take into account as
It
well as testing those streams to make sure to see what tier?
Well, so that's regulated by the Maryland Department of the Environment, and they establish the water quality standards and the tiers that you're talking about, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 streams. That's all established by Maryland Department of the Environment. And stormwater regulations then and erosion and sediment control regulations manage that and protect those streams. And we're required to review all projects to make sure that we're maintaining that water quality.
So is that part of the technical review and the agencies?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Yeah.
A big portion, in fact.
Yes.
Didn't you mention that that some standards had been set about water runoff from these solar panels back, and as far as the accumulated?
The guy from.
The impervious soil.
Oh, yeah.
Impervious soil, yeah.
Yeah, so
So I'm very concerned. I mean, as long as there are the right safeguards there, because I would hate to see anybody's field, pasture, lawn, whatever, be wiped out from that. I want to make sure that these people, whether they're small lots or large areas,
Yeah.
protected from any kind of runoff.
Yeah.
There's enough. I kind of look at it as
Thank you.
you get approved to build a house, but then get someone to
Yeah.
inspect it to approve it. I think you're gonna have enough safeguards.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, the building and construction do have inspections and requirements first.
Agriculture buildings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Space.
You want to move on then to maximum area of solar facility? So,
Did we talk about the setback?
so setbacks, we'll get in, that's
Oh,
not
later.
applicability, we'll
Okay.
get into that later. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you want to take this, Brenda?
Sure. So the current requirement is that you can't use more than 20 acres for the solar facility, panels and all related features and facilities. That's something that would still work. I mean, you could make it less, you know, if you're saying if the industry standard's about 5 megawatts per acre of panels. So like in order to get, did I say that right? I said, sorry, that's backwards.
Yeah.
1 megawatt is 5 acres of panels.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So, you know, it's 20 acres. I mean, 20 acres maybe is too much, but then on the other hand, there are, you know, like one of the considerations with the going to the 20 was that with the voltaic requirement, some crops, you know, that you grow underneath need more sun and they'll space the panels out. So there's no more panels than there would be, but it might take a little more space in order to allow more sun through for those crops. So, you know, it's kind of a balance there.
What does the industry say they need to make it worthwhile?
To ask the industry.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask the farmers about how are you going to do farming in underneath solar panels? How are you, you know, I don't understand some of it.
Well, when
I
my
mean,
farm,
sheep and goats,
when my
we
farm, if
raise
it's
them.
sheep and goats, it won't be farmed.
Well, sheep and goats will not go under any solar panels that I know.
Nothing's gonna be farmed.
Huh?
That's not gonna, it's not gonna be farmed.
No, that.
It can be, it
That's
can be.
happened. That's
But I
happened.
mean, in
There are
reality,
areas
in
where
reality,
they do
it's
that.
gonna be difficult. right?
But are they out west where they have no fences?
I'm just
How do
saying.
you tend to your animals or your crops inside that 20 fence? You can't. It's impossible.
Well, they come to where the feed is.
Well, yeah, but then when they're not
If they're hungry
feeding,
enough, they'll go.
there's no trees to go under if you're a sheep. There's no, you know, seeking refuge anywhere.
Under the solar panels.
Underneath the solar panels is way hot.
Just gotta get the apples from one side.
Well, how do you go into tree roofs? How do you do all that stuff? I don't understand.
There are
Agricultural
businesses
politics.
now that rent their goats out to eat underneath. the solar
Yeah.
panels, and they load
But
them
they have
up.
them all on leashes, right? So they're all-
That's what's going around.
Well,
They
this
just free
does fence-
range.
So they're fenced
So
in.
that's, okay, fenced in, there you go. So you have,
Almost all these solar areas have fences around them. And
oh yeah,
even
but you don't see any
smaller.
goats or sheep in there.
So, yeah, they
Not always.
Agrivoltaics is relatively new.
If the one out by the park, you know,
I'll put it this way, animals.
Well, they're not there all the time.
So animal voltaics is a fairly new thing. It wasn't even called that when we adopted this. We were the only county in the state who had that requirement. Agrivoltaic. No, it's the new buzzword instead of co-location.
Yes.
Actually, maybe we can start the next meeting with that short video. There's a short video from, I forget what the source was, but like a public, Maryland Public, not Maryland Public, National Public TV or something like that. It's a short 5-minute video about agrivoltaics that might be interesting for everybody to see.
There's one out of Wisconsin that's real interesting. Are you gonna share us some of the other jurisdictions, what they're doing, the best practices of those who also are involved?
I would encourage people to go out and do your own internet research, but, you know, from having done this before, everybody's all over the board. There's no like, even with it, like within the state, everybody's so different, that it's hard to even compare.
If you go across the bridge It makes, if you go across the bridge, it makes you sick to see the amount of farmland that's undersold.
Over towards the ocean.
Oh my. And it's just wide open almost. It makes you sick.
So what you're saying is maybe we don't want to emulate some of our neighbors.
That is exactly what I'm saying.
Maybe we'll buy solar credits in other counties.
But Brenda, you mentioned that we should do our own research, and I had a hard time finding.
It's all over. I go.
You have to, I'm just saying you're welcome.
No, that's great, but I'm saying, maybe it's easier for you guys to find it. And just-
There's just not that much.
I was fucked into
They're not.
I was-
Because I've looked at other counties before.
State of Maryland, yeah.
They're all over the board. Nobody's doing, you might not think this is right, nobody's doing anything else. And so it's hard to find something that we can use to emulate. You know, what is that?
Yes, maybe if we.
So citizens, yeah, we can dig into it too, right? We buy art. We buy it.
So
For that information.
what we've just got a couple minutes left, and then we're starting to digress into a lot of individual conversations, so, which is all good. We thank you all for sitting here for 3 hours. Lots of really great conversations. We very much appreciate it. We'll be working on compiling this information and documenting it. I'm hoping my computer didn't shut down.
At the end, we can reevaluate all this then, right?
Yes, yeah. So I am going to stop recording. And I think we'll adjourn, and we've got a next meeting date set.
Yes, next, the Wednesday, the 19th at 9, same place.
All right. I'm
So
gonna
we'll
turn-
see you, Pat will see you then, and then I guess we'll see Charlie.
Yes. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Thanks, everyone.
How do See, I think my laptop may have died. Which not to be recorded. Yeah, see, this computer that was recording, I may have to go back to my office and plug it into the docking station, get it powered back up again to stop the recording.
We'll have Chris, what happens if you just share the video for us? What happens if you go out? Does it mess up the recording or does it stop?
It's saying to leave the meeting,
We'll
but
leave this one on, and then I'll take this and go plug it in, and hopefully I can then stop the recording and take it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you guys need to walk out.
Oh, we did. Can we stop after first?
Yeah. Did you say especially red? Is there a special reason why, like for the commissioners meeting, you could just go in?
That's because that's a scheduled public
meeting.
bedroom.
I didn't know if that's something to do.
Same thing as planning commission. When you come in, it's basically buildings. Yep, this one was a specially scheduled meeting by us. I think it's yeah, we actually started doing that before any of this.
I think we're getting somewhere there, right?
It's not that thing.
Yeah,
It
you
should
can
be
send
a
it in your email.
Right.
Right, trying to walk right in, walk right kind of deal, walk right there.
Are you gonna give, are you okay, walk down? Okay.
Just not sure we'll be.
Thank you.
And it's
And there's
probably
more
more
people
people
that
that
you just know all of them.
Chris and I were
Well-
back and said, you know, all of them. But
Let's
I'm
say we're
also
all-
gonna let them
now,
know
we're
that they
requiring
can
more
go
staff,
and look
right?
at the recording while they want to hear.
Speech.
Well,
Um,